Oh, dinner.
Good evening, council and staff and visitors to our community room and others watching on TV. This is a study session for Tuesday, October 24th. This is Littleton City Council at 6:30 p.m. This study session has four topics in the agenda tonight, and because of some reasons that might make sense, we would like to alter the order just a little bit. The first presentation will remain A, but I'd like to do the telephone town hall debrief as B, and then go down to Public Works and study session. And the reason is actually Kelly isn't feeling that well, so sooner we can get her in and give her a presentation, sooner she can go home and take care of herself, so.
Does she have to be here at all?
Well, that's.
Yeah, she's upstairs.
Yeah, she's here.
No, I'm talking about sick people. I don't want to hear
Oh.
Well,
I quarantined her.
Jerry,
It's all bad, Jerry.
this is part of my final acts here. I want to make us a petri dish for.
Did you telephone it in?
So with council's approval,
All right.
everybody understand, we'll just order it a little bit. So this brings us to study session topic A on the agenda, which is ID 17-310, review of the draft business plan for the Geneva Village property. And I just want to direct you to a comment, the very last comment on the communication that we got. It says that staff anticipates this plan and this study session is not going to be the last decision, but perhaps a better understanding of what options the council may want to consider for the future. As you know, we all had questions about Geneva Village. We all felt like, from a business perspective, where are we at? From a fund perspective, where are we at in terms of a living, an appropriate living place in Littleton, where are we at? And we just had a lot of questions. So I want to turn it over to the Deputy City Manager, who's probably going to amplify a little bit what I've said. But what we've tried to do is get some information to council that answers some of those things, but honestly, I don't think we're looking to have that final decision tonight, because there's just a lot of thought there and a lot of information.
Thank you, Mayor. That's correct. This is one of those items that when I came on that I think there's other stuff Mark didn't want to deal with, so he gave me this one to carry on with. And actually, it's been a very enlightening project. So when I came on, we'd already engaged City Projects, and Doug Miller is here tonight to present to you, and then also he'll introduce his guests that he's got that helped on the project. But Doug knows, again, as he was directed putting this together, it really was about information gathering, putting some facts and figures together, and kind of giving an idea of what the options are, which I think most of us kind of know what the options were, but I think putting a little more meat on the bone and kind of what those options might look like. But also just trying to get an idea of what kind of future improvements are needed or continuing improvements are needed. I think that was part of the question, my understanding from the February study session, was just to give a little bit better handle on the condition of the current property, and then moving forward, what it would take to maintain it as is, and what are maybe some other options as we move forward with that property. So the staff, as Samir said, as staff is concerned, we're not really looking for necessarily clear direction tonight, other than if you want a little more information one way or the other. And as you know, the report is still stamped draft, and one of the big reasons for that, it's kind of the final draft, but we want to make sure if you guys caught anything in there, or anything we need to correct, or statements that are made in there. But also, if there's any a little bit more information that you may want to have us go, kind of ferret out in this process before I write in the final payment on this project, I would like to hear from you all in regards to that, so we can wrap this report up, at least finalize it, and then certainly down the road we'll come back and revisit this. So that's the plan from the staff side. I'd just like to hear from you all. So this is interactive. We want to make sure that as we go through this report, that if you have any questions, please address them with Doug. So Doug, with that, if you want to introduce yourself a little bit and tell them some of the work you've done.
Mayor and City Council members, thank you very much for hosting us tonight. I am sensitive to the time and sensitive to your time and to the other public participants here in this discussion. So,
Doug, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have a microphone up here, so
speak up.
Speak up a little more.
Okay, I can do
a little more for the crowd.
Sure. My name is Doug Miller. I've been in commercial real estate and construction management since 2000 in this town. I've worked as a professional in real estate, general contractor, and commercial subcontractor about equally in thirds over that course of time. City Projects is a 12-year-old consultant company as well as owner's rep that has been doing strategic real estate advisement and then project management services for nonprofits, for affordable housing companies, and for municipalities. since 2005, let's call it. We were introduced to Mark and Randy and Tiffany here through our ongoing role with South Metro Housing, who have retained us as a kind of like an asset management consultant, if you will, right now. They're going through some HUD programs and things, and they needed a little bit of horsepower to help them think about potential sites for development within their region and all that. And they introduced us into this role, for this project. Let me just start by saying that Randy, Mark, and Tiffany have been great to work with. They've given us everything that we've needed as soon as we've needed it. This has been a very interesting project for everyone on our side of the fence. Mostly because you just don't see too many properties like this in the Denver metro area. You just don't. There's considerations all the way around as you very well know, right? Because you get a lot of public buy-in on what maybe you should or shouldn't do with Geneva Village. So, personally, I have served my own community. I was the chairman of the Urban Renewal Board there for 3 years and a participant on the board for another 2. And so I'm very familiar with this public process, buy-in, so on and so forth. And I hope that the work that we did, which we'll start going through in detail in a minute. I'm going to introduce Ryan here and let him talk about what he does. But, drawing from that experience, I wanted us to give you all sort of the answers to the questions, right? What if we do this? What if we do that? What does it look like financially? And we took extra effort and care in staying out of anything that might be a political consideration and just wanted to kind of deliver you all the facts, okay? And that's what you'll find when you read this. So, this is Ryan Jones. He is a sub-consultant to us, one of the smartest financial minds in our industry in Denver, both for-profit real estate pro forma development as well as affordable housing finance. So.
Sure, Mr. Mayor, council members, thanks. I'd like to echo that and say thank you for having us tonight. And it has been a very interesting process to go through this, and we're happy to help out where we can. My background, I've been in affordable housing, well, broadly speaking, multifamily development and financing for about 14 years now, mostly in Colorado. As Doug mentioned, I focus a lot on affordable housing finance and development, and was brought on to look at various scenarios that could be put into this analysis for this project. So I'm happy to help and happy to be here and answer questions, and of course put the disclaimer out that every financial analysis is based on limited information, and we can certainly change the assumptions and make them more appropriate if that's what you feel you need.
Yeah, we put that in bold in here somewhere too. So, I don't want to necessarily read any of this to you, but I want to kind of go over each section at a high level, and then once we get into the specific options, talk a little bit about the numbers and how they were generated. So, once you step back and take a look at this property, there's really 2 things that you can do with it. You can either retain ownership of it, or at some point in time you can sell it or divest yourself of it, right? And underneath each one of those, there's a few examples that we gave of potential opportunities that we think, cover the majority of scenarios that could be played out here. And let's talk about the retaining ownership one first. We analyzed this from a standpoint of you basically maintain status quo, right? And then show you what the financial impacts are of that. You maintain ownership and raise your rents, assuming the same level of occupancy to the draft resolution that was put forth either in, was it April? In April's meeting? March's earlier than that, that talked about a level of rents increased from where they are today. And then just to give you an idea as to what, even though you would retain ownership and not, turn this into a more traditional, affordable housing or income restricted housing, to show you what those rents would be in this scenario, right? Which we refer to as a 60% AMI. And that is the average median income, right? Levels of rent that could be afforded there. So the first three options under the City of Littleton maintains ownerships are very typical in the way they kind of read and look. But what you'll see change is the cash balance, the net income, right, on the bottom line of each one of those. Your current rents today are the lowest of the three that we model. The proposed resolution rents are middle, and the 60% AMI rents are the highest of the three, okay? And that should, give you a little bit of indication where those proposed rents in the resolution stand. They are, I don't know precisely what they are, but I think they were in between 45 and 50% of AMI.
Yeah, just
something like that. So, page 4 of 14, we list out the salient, property factors. And by the way, before I go on, a ton of incredibly useful and guiding information was gained from us via the appraisal that was recently completed, as well as the capital needs assessment that was done. Staff was a great source of information. I sat through and watched a couple of times the previous study sessions that kind of led up to us getting hired for this assignment. And I pulled some questions and comments that came out of those from you all, and answered them in a couple of spots. And I'll touch on one of those here in a little bit. But it's a 2.81 acre site. 1964 was when it was built. Average monthly rent $371 per unit, and that essentially includes the utilities as well. So, projected capital required within the next year, and this information came from the Director of Facilities as well as from the Physical Needs Assessment, is in the neighborhood of $342,000. I'm not saying that's what you all are going to invest in this, but that is the cost of the things that are imminent and needing to be replaced, right?
And then ask questions at any time? Or
ask questions at any time.
All right, let's go over year one.
Okay.
I'm sorry, what'd you say?
Which section are we on?
Page 3.
Okay,
The
page.
chart at the top, table 1, capital needs for Virginia Village.
Yeah.
You have down $50,000 for electrical panels. Which electrical panels are you talking about?
I believe these are the panels at each one of the buildings that are need to be relocated.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because the physical needs or the capital needs assessment already has that value included in the $47,000 above. In fact, they have the entire replacement of every panel for every unit plus the main distribution panels in year one within the $47,000.
Okay. Then that's a correction that we'll make, because we were told, and this is why the electric panels is out 1, 2, and 3 years of $50,000 apiece, was that the initial cost was potentially supposed to be $47,000, but is now grown to an estimate of over 100 and some.
And we need to verify that, because I believe that we've identified some other panel replacements that need to be done, but I'll verify that.
Okay, because it has down here all 29 panels being redone plus the main distribution panel.
The main in there too, okay.
Yeah,
Let me re-verify that, because I thought our people
Sure.
found that we had some more.
Yeah, the electrical panels note came from your Director of Facilities with our discussions with them.
But if we're going to do, if the $50,000 is the right amount, then we should take out the $33,000 that the capital
potential.
needs assessment has in the $47,000.
Sure.
Because otherwise, we're double counting it.
Yep.
I think even at 50,000, we're underestimating it.
Well, he has an estimate for every single panel. He has a per panel estimate for each unit and a panel estimate for the original building main distribution panels. But if this information isn't accurate,
Right off the bat.
then we need a new one of these, because we can't be working from these figures, and then you guys have figures that are completely different than these figures.
Yeah, what we found is they didn't find everything in that report, so that's where our facilities folks came back and filled in some of these, but we'll verify all those numbers. That's part of what we want to make sure we got it right, but probably had it right.
And also, the way I'm looking at this too is that these numbers aren't the most accurate numbers in the world, but what it does do is it drives us toward a decision that's going to need to be made. Because whether or not they're spot on, because they're not, it's still not a good situation.
Well, I've said before, and I'll say again, that I think that we need to collect enough rents to make sure that we maintain the place. But I don't think we need to collect rents, enough the rents just to build up a reserve, and this is an enterprise fund. And so I'm agitated that the figures that we get have bogus costs in them. Back in February, we had a $163,000 roof replacement cost that was actually funded by insurance that showed up as a cost for, so, I mean, it appears to me that we're collecting rents that are sufficient to cover the future maintenance costs according to this. If this is wrong, then let's get a new one of these and get the right figures.
And you're getting a lot of this information from the Housing Authority, correct?
No, from the what?
Was it from the Housing Authority that you were getting the estimates on this
No.
physical need
No,
assessment?
this table one came from two sources: physical needs assessment and the director of facilities. When we talked to them about the planned infrastructure work that was going to need to be incorporated.
Because we're double counting asphalt work in here. They have asphalt work in here of $65,000, and then we have asphalt water and asphalt work summed together in the first year of $180,000. So if the 180 is right, then let's take out the 65.
Yeah, I will go back through this and double
Can't argue
check
that.
those
Yeah.
figures.
Okay. That's what I'm saying, Doug. These numbers aren't good. All this is doing is help us to go toward what way are we leaning?
Yeah.
You know, keeping it, selling it, or what?
Policy.
Yeah, that's all this is going to do. Because this isn't a numbers thing, that's for sure. For the reasons that you said.
Well, the information that you see in Table 1, capital needs, was used on a consistent basis throughout. So whatever we come back and modify, you know, based on any potential overlap that wasn't caught, we'll change the numbers. Okay. Having said that, it's not, you know, it's not going to erase the 342. It might shrink it a little or whatever, but it's not going to eliminate.
Well, it might shrink it substantially.
Yeah, I will go back, absolutely go back through that and double check everything. Yeah.
Well, I have a problem. If we're shrinking numbers substantially, it makes it really hard in my mind to have a fair discussion on what to do and what not to do. I know some of us can think in different ways than others, but my brain doesn't think so well if it's got story numbers rather than real numbers. Fairy tale numbers.
I would just say, Peggy, at this point, as Jerry said, that the numbers aren't going to be real, you know, the items Doug suggested are off or off. But what I think is really important is to let them go through their presentation, and what we want to figure out is our concept, our policy. If the cash flow is X, what do we do? You know, what direction do we want to do? Do we want to have a policy of subsidy or not? Or how do we get to where we're going and that kind of thing? And that's really the purpose of walking through this, is to get to that. And the numbers being accurate at this point can be annoying, if I could use the term, but it should not guide the way we think through the process.
Well, in my mind, if the gaps and so forth are huge, then my thinking about options is different.
I understand what you're saying. What I was told by Alan, who's the facilities, head of facilities, is that that 342 is going to be closer to the right number than what that report, because we found quite a few other things that need to be taken care of. That's what I was told. Now, we will go back and verify that. Again, I'm not saying that number's spot on until I go back and have him verify that. But I can tell you it's much more than 47,000 that first year that report is indicating. So,
Right.
Well, there's $300,000 difference between 47,000 and 342.
No,
so
I understand.
that's pretty significant. So,
Let's continue, and I think, if I could just summarize, part of our issue with the discussion last time was, is this thing going to require substantial reinforcement of funds, or can the rent keep it going? And with the reserve that exists for the last several years plugged in, where does it take us? So the numbers really do start to matter here on that decision process. However, let's continue on and see what else you've found that might help us understand.
I mean, the numbers always matter. We're 100% sensitive to that. These numbers were combined based on the notes I had with Alan as well as the PNA. There might be some slight overlap in things, but what I'll do is I'll just reissue the notes that I took from him and what City of Littleton told me as to what was going to be required. So,
well, I guess I'd like to see the details of what the City of Littleton tells you too.
Sure. Okay. So let's go ahead and skip to the first option under City of Littleton retains ownership, because everything that happens before there is kind of consistent throughout. The first table that you see is an outline of exactly where the current rents are today, the potential, I guess, annual rental income, which is confirmed very close to that number by the operating statements, assuming you're basically fully occupied for the year. I know you had a few units open, but Schmo wasn't 100% sure what the direction that the council was going to take, but then is getting those filled. So,
Do we know what occupancy is today? Because back when we looked at this in February or March, there were 2 units that they weren't even trying to lease.
right. Last I heard, they were either trying to lease them or had them leased.
I mean, it's been like 6 months. I would hope that they're leased, but
right.
we don't know that answer.
I actually sent an email to Schmo yesterday and had not heard back because I figured that question would come up. But they were working, they had to do some asbestos remediation on one of the units. So they were working on trying to get them rented. I would assume they're rented by now. We toured them 3-4 months ago when I first started, and they were just starting to do the work on it. So but as soon as I find out for sure, I'll let you know. But I have not heard back.
Yeah, I asked them 6-8 weeks ago. They were trying to get them leased. I think that's exactly the same thing. So I didn't check to see if they were, but I got to imagine.
It's taken forever to get these units leased. That part's driving me nuts. They weren't leased until we said let's lease them, and now they're still not leased. That was
I don't know.
Yeah. We usually have that answer.
We're not having trouble finding tenants. That's
Right. There's
We're 150 on a waiting
it's
list.
just getting their units
So,
refurbished. So.
Brian, you want to walk through the numbers here on table 3?
Sure, you bet. So table 3 just looks at the rents as they are, with no annual escalation in those rents, with the current operating expenses, and we looked at the income statements from the property, and I believe those were dated in June of this year. And looking at, you'll see the net operating income after the expenses, and below that, the estimated capital expenditures, which correlates to that first table that we were discussing. So that certainly can change going forward. But it looks at the cash flow after the anticipated capital expenditures. And that does take into account the current cash balance in the reserve, as you see, the 101,797. And so I suppose the most important line is the cash balance at the end of the year there. And that's again, under these assumptions, that's a cumulative balance over 5 years of about 1.3 million negative. And so I suppose the largest illustration with this first table is that at current rent levels and not escalating those rents on an annual basis, there exists a problem with the capital needs.
Assuming your figures for the capital needs.
Yes, sir.
Assuming our figures are capital needs.
So I don't remember nearly as well as Doug does anyway. So
Just a hair louder, Peggy, if you don't mind.
I said I don't remember nearly as well things as Doug does. So I'm not quite understanding why rents wouldn't increase during that period.
I believe that has just been the historical practice.
We've not raised Geneva Village rents in a number of years, and so this is assuming the same practice.
Yeah,
It was just an assumption made.
This is just a scenario as if the rents stay the same, like they have. So the next scenario, right, makes the rents at the levels of the draft resolution from earlier this year, which takes the first 10 units to $650 per month, the 1-bedroom, 1-baths to $750, and the 2-bedroom, 1-baths to $850.
Are you on table 4?
Yep, that is on table 4. Sorry about that.
Thank you.
Yep. The result, the financial result of that, you can see it on table 5.
And in this scenario, we did escalate the rents on an annual basis. Going forward, obviously the effective gross income is higher, and we're increasing the rents at 2% annually, assuming a 3% vacancy, essentially. Similar operating expense profile, and you can see the net operating income in this table is a lot higher than the previous scenario, and mostly that's due obviously to the rent increase, but also to the escalating rental income. If you look to the bottom line there, again, we're taking into account the cash balance, the existing reserve of $101,000, and you can see by the end of the 5 years, you're at a positive cash balance there. However, there still are some deficits, again, assuming those numbers are correct, so we can make some changes to that and see how that shakes out.
I think the generalization of option 2 under City of Littleton maintains ownership is the rent levels raised to the levels of the draft resolution would give you the means over a period of time, whether it be 4 years into the 5th year, to maintain that cash balance in this property, or to at least generate kind of an operating reserve back to what would essentially be the annual income.
And if I may, just as an illustrative point, going back to the first scenario as well, we looked at in general today what that scenario could leverage in terms of a mortgage to help pay for these improvements, just as an exercise looking through it. And if I jump back to the previous scenario, it could, maintaining the rents today would be able to, and again, under the assumptions that we're using, would be able to drive about $525,000 in debt. And again, it's just illustrative of what a property could do under these various scenarios to help support the capital improvements needed. Under the second scenario with the increased rents, it could, and again, under the same financing assumptions, drive about 1.9 million in debt to help pay for everything. Of course, the exchange there is the property has to maintain debt service over the course of that time as well.
And we know as a city, it's
Yeah.
not necessarily typical for you to go get a mortgage on something like this, but what that is reflective of is the property's standalone ability to take on some sort of financing, whether it be from other city resources and make payments back to that over time.
Are you assuming current commercially available mortgage, or are you actually putting it in at municipal financing?
Current commercial, and so it's just across the board if this were to go out and get a commercial loan for this type of product, excuse me. Yes?
On table 5, just help me out. As we get to 2022, what is there a reserve that remains? Is there any reserve, or are we down to just operating costs?
Well, on the bottom line, the cash flow at the end of the year, you can see we're negative in the first 2 years.
Right. That's the fund balance at the end of the year.
That's
Yes.
the fund balance.
Yes, sir.
Yep.
Doug, just to note partly on, as we start looking at raising rents, we had discussions about, do we start investing a little more in the units in a sense upgrade them? And certainly we looked at that for the next, if we're truly going to go to more of a market rate, that we'd have to invest in, and we didn't crank a number in here for that, right?
Yeah.
To make true.
That's a hard.
I don't know how many of you have been in those facilities lately, but yeah. So we're not saying we have to, but if we're going to start raising rents, we probably would want to be a little more responsible landlords or not. I mean, we wouldn't have to.
If we're going to raise the rents, yes, but that's the big question.
Right.
The
No, I understand.
$342,000 question, actually.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, just taking your scenario 2, though, what if we look at those rent levels? I'm not supporting any particular piece, but these rent levels are still below market, and I think you were saying, I don't know what level they are. Are these
So these rent levels
like
are
55%?
Yeah,
or
somewhere
45%?
between 45 and 50% of area median income levels. And you want to give them a little bit of color on how they get to that number?
Sure. Those income levels are dictated by HUD and published annually based on the location's metropolitan statistical area. This falls under the Denver MSA, and they're adjusted annually by HUD. Last year they went up, I believe, by 5% or so. So for an example, these rents, the proposed draft resolution rents for the studio at $650 would be approximately 45% of the AMI level. So for one person, 45% reflects about $26,500 a year in income, if you follow. And then the rents are derived by assuming you're paying no more than 30% of your income towards that rental payment. So these proposed rents float somewhere around the 45% of the area median income range.
Yeah.
So they're above,
They're
what would be considered affordable?
Technically speaking, they're below very low income, but 30% of the AMI is, I think, considered the bottom of affordability, and the most affordable, if you will.
So if I understand you, what you said was HUD considers 30% of your income to go to housing.
Correct.
So if we're at 45 to 50% of the income, then we're above what HUD says is an appropriate level that people should be spending on housing.
I understand what you're saying, and it is a little confusing. 30% of the income, so as I mentioned in the first example, for one person at the 45% area median income level would be making, and these are 2017 rent levels, would be making $26,500 about a year, and then you take 30% of that, to come up with the rent level, and that's how.
Well, HUD does an adjusted income level. They don't just take 25,000 and say that's your, they do an adjusted.
In what sense?
In what sense? That's how you get down to 30%. You do an adjusted, you take away medical and you take away other expenses. That's how HUD does their adjustments.
Yeah,
So
right.
you get to 30%. So when you say 30%, it's not just 30% of what you earn. They do an adjust, HUD has a formula, it does an adjustment that gets you down to another number, and that's the 30% you pay.
So, in the world of low-income housing tax credit affordable housing, there is a 30% AMI level of development. There is a 60% AMI level. Correct me if I'm wrong, but there's an 80% level when it comes to different, right? And there's 100% of AMI as well is potentially subsidized or considered affordable depending on the area that it's in and the workforce needs and things like that.
100%?
Yeah.
Each one of those levels carries with it a certain parameter of financing. For example, you can't use the low-income housing tax credit currently above 60% of the AMI, but the other income levels are, you know, the missing middle, that unicorn in most communities where you want to try and find those rent levels.
Yeah. So, what we wanted to try to highlight was with option 3, which begins at table 7 here, is under kind of, table 6 on the rents. Yeah, sorry, table
Randy,
6.
do you have any more hard copies? It's really difficult to follow on this. I haven't seen them over there.
On table 6 is
Old technology.
is in a likely scenario where, you know, as you see later on in the other options, potentially an affordable housing developer would come in here and get a low-income housing tax credit deal. These rents would almost certainly be based at the 60% of AMI rate, okay? And that's what we modeled in the last option in your report. But the 60% of AMI rent levels are higher than your draft resolution, and the table 7 pro forma just highlights really the difference in that in comparison to your cash balance and your capital needs work. So.
And as was being discussed earlier, this would require a level of investment in the units. Is that included in the pro forma?
Well,
Yes, it still assumes the, again, if it's a correct table for the capital needs assessment, it assumes those levels. So, as was mentioned, you know, if you are raising rents, it may be a consideration to put some more improvements, and so that line item may increase as you increase rents. As you go to these 60% rent levels, you can see on the bottom line there, you know, by the end of the year 5, you projected again under these assumptions to have about $500,000 in the bank at that point.
So I think your question was, is it considered in this table? It's not.
Right, that's what I was just trying to say. This does not have, because it puts this in rent levels that begin to approach, if not exceed, the equivalent for a construction period time rents that are in Littleton. So this is this market, it would require some renovation of the units that are not included in this pro forma.
That is correct.
yeah. We didn't do a full study of what a true market comparable situation would be at this site. Couple of big challenges. The age of the buildings, whether it would be determined that the buildings would, you know, would have the bones, the integrity to truly do what it would take to make them market comparable to the newer product. achieving market rents in this community? That's a pretty significant question.
Yeah.
You know, and what, you know, how do you do that?
Given what I've seen, I understand.
Yeah. And so, you know, so what we did continue to keep was all you know, capital needs that are projected annually, you know, through years 2 through 5. We did a kind of average study at the request of Tiffany here to try to understand what the annual, you know, capital account contribution should be at a minimum per the capital needs report, and that number is just over 20,751 actually, I think is what it was. So from years 6 through 20, you know, the identified things that should be replaced on an expected useful life consideration, we're about 20,000 a year, call it. And that's appliances, that's carpet, that's paint, that's future, you know.
Today's level.
Yeah.
If you were looking at that as a commercial real estate investment, are there 20 years left in those buildings that a financier would cover it for 20 years or 30 years or whatever, with it being built at 65?
As long as they're maintained, I don't see why you couldn't get that time frame out of them. But we're talking about things like, you know, everything from caulking to paint to roofs when they need it to windows to all the things that just need to be reinvested in and maintained over the years. You know, the structures in general seem okay, right? You're putting a bunch of money into the infrastructure right now, which is going to take a lot of time to pay off, however you choose to move forward on this property, as if you choose to keep it, right? So.
One of the things that we had discussed was if we came up with a different rent structure, that would, as new people came in, that would be their rent as opposed to affecting all the existing. Did you look at any of those scenarios?
It's going to take a long time to catch up with this property. The units don't turn quickly. And so that strategy, you know, if you have 2 units turn a year, it's going to take you 10 years to get to a point of an updated level of rents, right? And so that's a challenge too, from a financing perspective.
So your chart did not take into account what the previous resolution actually had, and that was raising rents on the units as they were vacant. You're raising rents on units while they're occupied.
Well, so the situation is, and this is information from Schmo, that essentially all tenants there sign a lease, I believe was for a period of 1 year, and then essentially are month to month after that. Okay? And so when you talk about the tenants that are there today, you know, there's very little long-term incentive, you know, for them to go anywhere. And that's why so few units, quote unquote, turn.
So the answer is no.
No. But if you wanted to go through and raise rents, I mean, I don't know how to predict exactly how the units are going to turn.
But what you could do is include something like a scenario 2B, which would assume a 2% or 3% or some level of turnover, and put that in there, because.
And I'll tell you, that's exactly why this thing is labeled draft, and we all wanted to come before you guys tonight, because if there was another scenario that you wanted to see, we're going to make it, we're going to include it in here and get this back to you.
So I mean, I think we have 2 items. One is the truing up of the numbers
I've got that.
With the facilities, but the other is taking a look at if the rent increases are only applied as a unit turns over, what does that look like?
And part of that would be looking a lot farther out than 5 years.
But it gives you the first 5-year picture that says it's somewhere between 1 and 2.
Right.
Well, maybe a scenario too that doesn't show an immediate doubling of the rents. Because I mean, I get it economically. That's, makes the most sense because of the cost and the numbers make sense. But from a humanitarian perspective, it doesn't. So what are some things in between there that would be easier to, for people to be able to afford and for us to, you know, charge?
So I heard a couple things. So
Maybe a 3B in there too.
yeah. So what if we were to provide a table that showed essentially a 2% annual increase in rents compared to where they are today starting this year?
If that equates to a turnover rate of something that's being experienced.
I think that's a different table.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the delta in the rent levels between the draft resolution and this are different enough that it's going to be different. It's going to look different.
And just,
I'm just trying to go back to, our resolution said we would only raise rates as units turned over. And so trying to get to what that resolution level was, what does that look like?
Yeah.
And, however you're going to treat the aggregate rent level, if it has an underlying assumption that says we've assumed X turnover and that's where the rent increases are coming from, so that it's a blend between 1 and 2 or 1 and 3 as we look at that. So you have a 2B and a 3B that assumes that, taking into account as Councilmember Brinkman has mentioned, the humanitarian consideration.
Absolutely. And as I stated earlier, we didn't include any of that sort of thought or policy, if you will, in this report. We just wanted to give you hard facts, numbers.
Understood.
Yep. But that's great, and we will incorporate that. Yeah. We'll work with these guys here to make sure that we all have an annual turnover number that is based on historical facts and figures of what we're talking about going over.
You can even update it for current ages if those are known.
if I may, just to clarify, I heard two different scenarios. One where you increase the rents, say at 2% a year, the existing rents, and then another where you have an annual turnover, and upon those turnovers, you increase to the proposed rents. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Just for sake of time, do you want to go to the opportunities to sell?
Yep.
Are you ready?
Yep.
So council, go to the next item.
Is it possible to do a third thing? A protected turnover, right? So the turnover rates going up, but also adding in cost of living increase. And I'm not saying that quite right, but a factor that would maybe like a 3% a year for everybody. Don't get scared over there. I'm just
Yeah.
looking at that. Otherwise,
Yeah, I mean, that would be-
otherwise we really slide down and we don't generate some of the increase that is needed just to do the maintenance from year to year. Although some maintenance is a lot more expensive than others, but something that isn't going to bankrupt people, but is going to bring in a little bit more.
Yeah, I think we can do that, absolutely.
Now, if
Just
everybody
incorporate
else
them.
doesn't like that, then I'll withdraw the request.
Right.
Well,
That's a combination of the two things
Yeah.
that we just were really talking about, so.
Well, Doug and Ryan, there's going to be this sweet spot, so to speak, between hitting a target rate for turnover units, plus possibly an annual increase in existing tenants.
Right.
That is going to produce a pro forma that isn't that ugly.
And that is agreeable by you. Yeah.
And so trying to kind of add to what
Yeah,
she
so
said.
that's a that's a great comment. We talked about that in the couple weeks kind of leading up to this is, you know, is the better or different direction from you all to say, where do we need to be able to deal with these expenditures or end up with a certain level of, you know, cash in the bank, operating reserve, whatever you want to call it, over the course of so many years. And if there's a specific directive that you all have in common, that you want us to focus on that and say, this is what that looks like, assuming we get a couple, 2 or 3 units turnover per year, and we will incorporate a 2% annual increase in rents from here on out, that we can take those parameters and we can come back to you with what that number looks like. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And then,
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
yeah, maybe that's a discussion for another day based on a little bit more information.
Yes.
Maybe, right? So.
I'm well aware that the repositioning of older real estate assets has so many assumptions in there that it's just, you can never encompass them all. I wonder if council would be interested in entertaining some sort of thought. These are age qualified, they're not income qualified, but it's obviously very low income, and I suspect a lot of the people in there are qualified. If we had an income or asset qualification, would it be worth considering injecting that into the conversation as far as if you are income qualified or asset qualified, you stay at that 2% level or whatever level, and if you aren't, I mean, technically Warren Buffett qualified to live here because it's age qualified but not income qualified. So there may well be some people in there who could afford to pay more, and we could upgrade those units more quickly or have more for the place, and it might help us cure that. And then the people who do qualify for the lower rents will be there, and that could all be done on a very confidential basis. But we could do that. I don't know if that's...
Well, that's in part a question, I think, for our attorney, because that's not the basis of the purpose of the property.
Yes,
It's not the basis for the purpose of the property.
Well, it hasn't.
We can change it.
It hasn't changed that. That's what I'm saying.
That's why I said it's almost as much a legal question as it is.
So
it's a
policy question.
Exactly.
He figures out how to make it happen.
I believe 1981, the so-called Telluride rules in Colorado say municipalities can't rent control legally. So if that were the case, I would guess that you would have to sell the property to a third party.
Is that considered rent control when you...
If I had to guess, yeah, from a legal opinion, it would be.
Yeah, okay.
Rent control is when you're having somebody else not raise their rent. You can choose not to raise your own rents.
Yes, but
So I think that Telluride case is what they were trying to control other folks. They can control their own rent increases.
Council, what I suggest is that becomes an option that you want to consider. We'll certainly look at it, and we can provide you an opinion on that in terms of what the law is, because that's what we do.
Sure.
I have one other piece, and I don't know if it'll be for you guys or for our attorney. Assuming that we're gonna keep the residents that are there now for X amount of years, and until we have turnover. What about if we had our own funds for subsidy? So even though the resident is paying 30%, whatever it is it's adjusted to, but we're saying that the apartment itself is for $1,000 because we're actually upgrading and doing all this other stuff. Then the city subsidizes that. Let's say the resident pays $200, the city subsidizes the $8. I mean, we can have separate line items for that kind of stuff, I'm assuming accounting-wise, and then have a separate kitty or...
Yes, I mean, you could, and this really depends on whether you run it as an enterprise or just run it within the budget. You could certainly say, okay, to have this break even, we need to charge $1,000 a month. But we elect not to have a break even, we elect to subsidize it, so we're going to charge less than that. Now, there's obviously financial consequences that you can address, but from a legal standpoint, honestly, government subsidizes lots of things, and they don't charge the full freight. And that's really a policy decision for the council to make.
Thank you.
And I think Geneva Village is an enterprise fund. So essentially, if you wanted to look at doing that, you would essentially transfer the money, say, from the general fund to Geneva Village so that the funds are going into Geneva Village, but then you use it for upgrades or whatever you're talking about.
So we would be pulling funds from Geneva Fund like we have in the past, Geneva, as we have in the past then?
You'd be pulling, if you want to subsidize, you'd essentially be pulling it from the general fund. So the funding would
From,
have to.
yeah, the city general fund.
Right.
But in the past, we've pulled money from reserves or operating reserves from Geneva Village
We've used fund balance, yes.
and not repaid it.
Fund balance from Geneva Village.
Yes.
It's a while.
There's,
Okay,
No,
Okay.
We maintain 98,000 is what the target is for that.
okay, so, should we talk about the opportunities?
Yeah, so let's walk through opportunities to sell property. There are essentially three here. The first one is going out to market and selling to a market rate developer operator, for lack of a better term. Okay. There is zoning that allows density on this property. These numbers came from your appraisal, but they were confirmed by an architect who I spent a little bit of time with, just laying out really high level to see could we fit 190 units of this on this property, and they are pretty true. So if you think of a densified property, which is what would most likely end up there, 3-story development, densified property, you'd have in the neighborhood of 190 units, about 800 square foot apiece. 1.6 would be the average rate, $1.60 average rate per square foot. And then this would result around at a $1,200 per month average rent, for this property. There are some appealing property location aspects. There's a high barrier to entry to where this location is. I think that the location near downtown is a great asset to this. There's essentially green space all the way around it, big trees, all those types of things. Want to add anything to that, Ryan?
Sure, just the projections are based on an assumption if private market rate developer were to look at this based on 90 units and it's reasonable assumptions, and should be noted per the appraisal, the enhanced value of the land, the value add from going from the existing use to this use would have the land value of about 3.5 million as opposed to 610,000.
We're not telling you if you put a for sale sign up there tomorrow, someone's going to give you 3.5 million for it. But I guess the information is that this land is more valuable than the current kind of income-based appraisal based on what's there today and the money that it's making.
So is the 610 based on as is and the 3.5 based on the developed cost minus demo? Is that
the potential for someone to come in and develop this number of units that would generate this much income?
Okay.
Right.
So if the 610 is as is, that tells us a lot right there. But are those the basic assumptions, or were there hypotheticals, were there zoning issues or any of that?
Didn't consider any type of rezoning hypotheticals or any of that, just based on what's accomplishable today under current zoning.
So to put that into perspective, the Grove is a little over 4 acres at 160 units. We're talking 190 units on 2.8 acres.
That's packed in there.
But they're small, they're 800 square feet.
800 square feet.
Are you not are you just doing that as kind of like an average, or, because you're not listing out 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom,
And
where
so
are you gonna park?
that would alter.
City center. No, the assumptions that went into this, into the appraisal, the property was surface parked. So, based on parking standards of today.
So you're gonna build 190 units plus surface parking,
Yeah.
which is, what, add another 90, 200 and some odd, 300 spaces, all on 2.8 acres? And you
Yeah.
think you can get that in 3 stories?
Yeah.
It can certainly happen. I think it'd be more realistic for a developer to come in like 100 units property that size, though. to
I
have
think
a-
you're,
have
I
a
think
better
you're probably
product.
right, and I think the market might say that, you know, an average of 1,200 gross square foot per unit is probably better versus 800. 800 is a relatively aggressive number.
But does that change, that, I mean, that's, that.
Yeah, that would change- that would
Does that
change
change the
the
land
dynamic.
value?
Change
The 3.5 million?
Oh, sure. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
But the whole.
Not a lot, because it changes your rent level per unit.
The rent levels might be higher.
And you need, for that kind of space, you need fewer parking spaces too, so, for the total.
And so this is a big ball of clay that can be molded in 100 different directions
Yeah.
here, okay? We went off the numbers that were given to you by your appraisal that you all commissioned and paid for, and vetted them at a high level, just to say, is this realistic? It's potentially realistic. Yep. I guess the thing to take away on this option is a couple things. Number one, other jurisdictions that have done things like this, some have put out kind of an RFP stating some things that you as the current owner would not really deed restrict, but wish to see in any sort of development and make it a condition of the sale, right? So if you said, we only want your property, this property to have a maximum of 100 units in 2-story walk-up type, or whatever you could fit, you could say that, this is what we want to see there. Put it out in an RFP, and then request proposals from interested developers that would say, this is what we'll offer you for this property to maintain this program, right? And so, you know, you don't just go put a for sale sign up and see what happens. I mean, it's usually a pretty controlled process, which you would have a lot of input in. Anything to add?
No, I think that's correct, and again, that we could go several different directions with this. This is just an example based off the appraisal.
Yeah, so if we wanted to make as a condition, say there's 28 units that are currently occupied, and it's to make some provision at a certain rent level for those 28 units in a new facility as opposed to the existing facility. What does that do to the attractiveness relative to market? I don't know.
Are you talking scrape?
Well, I'm assuming this is a scrape.
Yes.
But then he's to provide in whatever new is built, 28 units for the existing residents.
I don't know what that would do to the attractiveness. You know, it may have some factor in what whoever specific developer might offer for the sale price, because in their pro forma, they would be looking at a certain number of units that would be designed for, you know, affordable, quote-unquote affordable standards, which would potentially affect some revenues or something like that. But
That is a way for municipalities to kind of help shape a development where they own the land. You can put something to the effect of a right of first refusal for the new unit for existing tenants. And then, of course, it all depends on the financing, but since the city does own the land, you could put out a request for proposals and state, this is what we would like to see, and see what comes back.
And you would want to vet all that legally.
Yeah.
And everything.
Oh, I'm sure.
Right, yeah.
But that would, getting to some of our humanitarian considerations, provides an option.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of there's a lot of different opportunities in this, right? A lot. So,
A lot of hurdles.
yeah, the reason why we incorporated the 10-year pro forma in here is just to give you an idea on what, you know, a for-profit real estate developer would look at, and so you could understand why this would be an attractive, you know, potential deal for them. It's a positive cash flow situation with a, I would call it at or above, slightly above average return potentially in the marketplace today.
Possibly, I mean,
Possibly.
based on the assumptions, it's certainly a positive net present value.
Yeah.
Did you guys look at a commercial use or retail use as opposed to a residential?
No, we
We
just
did not.
stuck with the residential. There's a high likelihood that a mixed use with ground level retail could be, you know, found really appealing by someone who does that. Zoning allows it to have the mix of use and the multifamily, so it's true.
We haven't had a lot of luck with that, though.
So, the next one, I'm just trying to move us along a little bit. The ownership transfer to SMO. You've talked a little bit about pieces of these two alternatives for South Metro. The idea of age qualified and then the idea of some roof dense housing. But what is the advantage of ownership transfer to SMO?
So, a couple things. And we can kind of talk about the last two options sort of in partnership, right? When we were thinking about, okay, is this a potentially real possible avenue? Potentially. So as an affordable housing, you know what? You should take this.
It's all yours, Ryan.
Well, starting out, you know, as an affordable housing property, and to avoid the what we were talking about before with rent restrictions imposed by a municipality, as a quasi-government authority, a housing authority could go in and put rent restrictions on a property like this and use certain types of favorable financing to help either refinance, rehab the property as is, build a new property, and could also possibly, and I don't know the status of this, but they could have Section 8 vouchers that could help, as you were talking to, Councilman, subsidize some of the rents going forward. So there are a variety of options there, and of course that's what a housing authority does. Going to option 3, we looked at a middle-of-the-road tax credit scenario with 150 units. The problem with that scenario, again, is that you'd have to sell it most likely to a housing authority, or you could put it out on the market and make that a qualification for the sale or transfer of the land. As you all probably know, affordable housing financed by tax credits is very competitive right now, and also very hard to finance in terms of filling the so-called gap in financing. These rents under that scenario would be the 60% AMI levels that we were looking at earlier, but again at a 150 unit scenario.
But it wouldn't be likely that a housing authority would do it without tax credits.
That's correct, yes. That's the main
Still,
financing.
no matter if it's the housing authority or a private entity, they still got to have tax credits.
Tax credits.
That is correct.
And what we're talking about here is like the third option under sell. We're not talking about the second option under sell, right? I think the reason why we went through this exercise is really to understand the scope of the capital requirements necessary to pull something like this off. It would be a very large challenge with a lot of headwinds. It would be made easier on a dollar per dollar basis if the land cost was reduced in some sort of a partnership between the city and SMO. But it would, even if the land was free, in our analysis, it would still require them to pony up nearly $7 million. And in this area,
5 to 7. I would
5
say.
to 7.
Yeah, under these assumptions.
Yeah. In this area of the Denver metro, I think it's maybe slightly greater than average, that this type of low-income tax credit would win both state and federal award compared to other areas that are actively pursuing these at all times. So that's a challenge. The challenge of the capital is a challenge as well. This is a big challenge.
So what taxes does SMO pay?
What taxes?
Yeah.
As a housing authority, they don't.
So how's tax credit?
Yeah, you need a sponsor.
Pardon?
You need a sponsor. It's not their taxes that would be credited.
Right.
It's the investors.
So a tax credit is a financing tool. A developer would sell those tax credits where the dollar for dollar tax credit against liabilities otherwise due, and they would sell those to an investor, most likely a bank, to help pay for the project.
So SMO would sell credits for taxes that they don't pay to somebody else.
Who would pay taxes.
Well, this is a great system.
It is a great
It's been
system.
around for
It
years.
is. It is actually a good system.
What makes our country fantastic?
It's
Yes.
America.
No, it's better than Section 8, in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely.
It gives poor people a place to live.
Absolutely.
Right. So the middle option here, option 5, SMO as a affordable housing operator has access to different types of financing. They have access to HUD programs where they, and they're currently going through this right now, entering into this RAD program with HUD, where they're able to really go through and analyze their existing portfolio, of which they have a lot of single-family homes and duplexes and other things. And if the capital needs to bring them back to a, I don't think the term's like new, but I don't know what the right term is. But when they're in the dire need for repair, some of these units are, and if their capital needs are actually greater than the value of the house itself, HUD is giving them the opportunity to do a lot of different things with that, and they could essentially dispose of, demo, and rebuild with some of these funds, and be able to channel some of these funds into potentially Geneva Village as its owner, right? And clean up their portfolio a little bit, and then operate this under all the state statutes and federal statutes as an affordable housing property. So that's kind of what the middle option there is on this. So,
And whatever construction were to happen, it likely we would displace 28 families until that construction was completed.
Or some phased, and however, what kind of phasing you would ever do, right, to go through and upgrade and do repairs and do whatever needed to be. It's tough. Right. So.
Have we beat you up enough?
Yeah. Not quite. I got another 3 minutes here. No, I think all the comments were great. We were really hoping to get some of this feedback and some of your perspective here. We have a couple good takeaways. We'll be in touch first thing in the morning just to make sure we're on the same page. Any more discussion that happens in your meeting tonight, you can let us know.
I won't, because I'm leaving.
Oh, okay. Oh, Randy can let us know. So,
Okay. Does council have any final questions?
Thanks, guys.
Okay, so we'll be looking forward to, Randy's taking a lot of notes. He's going to be working with his staff, with you all, to try to find the answers to the questions that the council's asking. You may have to watch this on video again to make sure it's
absolutely.
Hopefully you'll see it one more time with a lot of the answers.
Okay.
Randy, you know, we have the time expectation to get back to us. Sooner is better.
Yeah, I think
Sooner's better. Sooner's better for everyone. So we'll be working around this right away.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Some challenging work.
Thank you. Thank you, Randy. Appreciate it.
So let's continue on. We'll do our next agenda item, and then we'll take a break, because I think we'll be right at about the break time at that time. This brings us to agenda item B, which, as I mentioned, we did alter the schedule slightly. The former D is now B, second item. It's ID 17-311, telephone town hall debrief.
Yeah, that was good.
With Kelly Nardi, our communications director, making a presentation.
Hi, Council. Good evening. I think you're all a safe distance away from me.
Not safe enough as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you to my coworkers for letting me jump ahead. And no, I did not get a flu shot, but I will. Council, you asked us to touch base with you and report back on the results of the telephone town hall. To refresh your memory, at your retreat in April, one of your 7 priorities was to do district meetings. We had a study session with you in July where you decided several things, that you wanted to do a citywide meeting instead of district specific, that you wanted to have the meeting somewhere besides the Littleton Center, and that you wanted to use technology and televise it as if possible. So we contracted with Broadnet, and we had a telephone town hall on September 20th at the Falls Event Center. Telephone town hall is what these meetings were initially called. That's really not what they are anymore, because it's not just telephone. There were many ways people could take part in the meeting, with landlines, with cell phones, using a tablet, using a desktop, and from Facebook and social media and the city website. So I provided information in your packet on Thursday. It's a report that our staff did. And then actually just today, our vendor, if you could pass that around, Peggy. Our vendor did a case study and they provided this information today. Our numbers are a little bit more conservative than theirs. We just wanted to be absolutely sure we had some good numbers for you. So we had a total reach of 753 people. They participated for an average of 23 minutes. Our engagement on social media isn't very active usually at that time of the evening, so we saw a 772% increase in engagement. As you recall, the topic was infrastructure and streets, and people were very, very interested in that topic, it seems. So we have some live polling that we did during the meeting, so you can see maybe it's a good transition to what the Public Works staff is going to talk about, the satisfaction with the condition of the city streets, and the support for investment more in our infrastructure. What do you think about this town hall method? 69% of people thought that it was very effective, and 26% thought it was somewhat effective, so 5% weren't quite so convinced. But that's okay, I'll take 95% anytime. All of the questions that were submitted to us on Facebook, Twitter, in person, both those we were able to get to and those we were not able to get to, and on the telephone, were all assembled. Thank you, Tyler. And prior to the event, we created a Littleton Town Hall website, but the Public Works staff was great. We got all those questions. Many of them were concerning the intersection of Santa Fe and Mineral, so we kind of consolidated all of them. So you can see all of the questions are on the right side of the screen with the responses from our Public Works staff. And then, I'm not going to touch the computer. And then we have the website is established now so that you can go and you can watch that meeting. You can watch some of the video clips that we pulled out of the meeting. And it's available to promote into the future, to get more people to sign up. You know, we purchased a landline list. I don't know what the numbers are, but there's a lot of people that don't have landlines anymore. So we promoted this and publicized it through all of our traditional channels to get people to go ahead and sign up for it and get their cell phone in there so that they would get called on their cell phone. So we think we can only grow the potential by continuing to promote it. Those people that signed up for it with their cell phones, we have that information captured. so that if we do this again, our list will be bigger than it was before. So that's about all I have to report to you. The staff thought it was great. I said it was exciting and terrifying at the same time. And so we would propose that you utilize this again into the future, maybe quarterly or twice a year. With some of the decisions you will probably be looking at into next year. Particularly, I think you're going to have a council workshop at some point in the first quarter. So maybe based on some of the decisions that come out of that council workshop, you might want to have another town hall. I think the important thing, 60% of the U.S. Congress uses our vendor, and one of the things we took away is that keeping it to a specific set of topics is really important rather than opening it up to just about anything. So whether it's public safety or we continue to talk about roads and infrastructure, whatever the topic might be, we might want to limit it to something specific. And that's all I have for you. Yes?
Yes. Kelly, during the event, there were folks kind of screening the question to get to who was next on the phone or whether it was coming from an internet text inquiry or the like. How did that process go, and was either during the event or after that, was anyone frustrated that they didn't get their question in?
It was exciting and terrifying at the same time. So our vendor had screeners, and the screeners look for certain things. They want to make sure, like a crank call, this is the first thing, that somebody's not calling up just to go off on you. And then we let them know that our subject matter was streets and roads and infrastructure. I think almost everybody who had a question related to streets, roads, and infrastructure got their question asked during the event. And if not, it was just some nuance off of Santa Fe and Mineral that got answered on the website.
And during that particular event, there was a lot of focus on Santa Fe and Mineral, which is not the only place where we have street infrastructure issues. Was there opportunity to do a more balanced view of where issues may be across the city rather than just focusing on the one, which I know was important?
The focus came from the citizens, not the city.
Well, that's what I was asking. So.
Yeah, what we said was, streets and infrastructure. And so it was interesting that the majority of the participants were focused on Santa Fe and Mineral.
That's fine.
We had other questions come up about crosswalks and some other things, but yeah, they're all listed there. Broadway and Euclid, Court Place and Littleton Boulevard, the Mineral Light Rail Station, some of them.
Somebody asked if they could call in and hear the council meetings on their phone. You don't have to answer me right now, unless you know.
Yeah, I think so.
They have a smartphone.
And so it's just, you have a phone number they can call and listen to the council meetings while they're going on?
Okay, let me check on that.
You can hear on a landline? Because you can...
Some phone.
Yeah. All you would do is just go to the website on your phone and listen to it over in your phone.
Yeah.
But what if they
I watch on my phone
I'm
at
not sure that
home.
they have a smartphone.
Well, then they
Well,
can't.
do they have a computer? Because they can watch it live on the computer.
You have to have the right technology.
The question was, can somebody call on, let's say, a rotary phone?
Okay,
Which
well,
don't
let's
exist
say
from the
the answer
Smithsonian, that one
today
guy.
is no. But could it be done? Probably. I don't know how, but
Okay.
I'm sure we can.
No, you have the last rotary phone in town, so Kathy doesn't want to listen.
You can hold the phone up to the TV and they
So additional questions from council?
Good job.
Additional questions from council? Okay, one comment I have is, at some point, because this is a direction, there needs to be some cost-benefit consideration to see how much this thing's costing per person that's contacting or whatever criteria, whatever metric we want to use, but it still is expensive, it's not cheap.
It is.
But perhaps if we made more use of it, we might be able to bring the cost down, as was being suggested. There might be, maybe we buy some equipment, or, I don't know what the answer is. But I think future council is going to need to know the values in it.
Yeah, and we purchased the package that included it all because we didn't know what we were doing, and we didn't want to do it and have something go wrong and say, oh, we wish we would have got that piece of it. So we chose the entire package. So.
That's good. Good move.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Kelly. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Take care, Kelly.
Thank you.
Let's take a 10-minute break, and we'll move on after that to the next item on the agenda. Us to agenda item C, which was the former B. It's ID 17-313, Public Works Traffic Discussion with our Public Works Director, Keith Reister, and his team.
Hello, Keith Reister, Public Works Director. Happy to be here with y'all tonight. Just so you know, the deal that we made to move from B to C with Kelly was that the next town hall will not be about infrastructure or traffic. That was the deal. You don't trade up in the draft for nothing. All right, you got to get something out of the trade up in the draft. Good for you. So tonight we've got a. That's right. You know, it's like the Browns every year.
Wow.
Sorry for all you Cleveland fans at home. So this one actually, interestingly enough, this particular item was on the agenda to meet with council actually before I even got here and before Brent was actually here early in the year. So it's actually great, and as you've already seen when Public Works comes to visit you, it's important for me to have members of our staff that are here to interact with you and a chance so that everyone sees.
Just to fuse the target, right?
That's correct. Correct. So you get a familiarity with our bench strength and some of the folks you'll see out there working on issues and all those kind of things. So tonight, what we're going to do in this discussion is we've got this kind of split up. And our objective tonight is to really just give you an overview of the current state of traffic and transportation in the city. If you look at the community surveys for the last several years, congestion, traffic is kind of always at the top of the list in some form. We saw that in the telephone town hall as well. So this is a really good chance for us to give you a quick overview of sort of where we are, what kind of things we just are accomplishing in 2017 as the construction season ends, and what the future looks like from there, as well as share with you some of the challenges that are wrapped around traffic and transportation here in Littleton specifically. So that's really what we're going to do, as well as Q&A along the way. So our team, I'll do a quick overview of our team and then get into it. So there's, me, and we have Tim Weaver, our traffic analyst over here, Aaron Human, our traffic engineer, and Brent, you've met before as well, our city engineer. Interestingly enough, Brent and I we've been at conferences the last couple of days focused on transportation. I had the good fortune to sit in programs today with the deputy director of CDOT as well as the CEO of RTD, and a number of things related to some of these topics, so it was really good. I just want to kind of set the tone and sort of have you think about traffic and transportation in the sense of something that's not traffic and transportation. It's really environmental. And so oftentimes when we think about stormwater and environmental issues and watershed management, we tend to think of things as a holistic ecosystem that impacts all the inputs to that. You have the wildlife, the flora, the fauna, all the impacts that come into that. And traffic and transportation is very much the same. And so what we're going to be talking about at some level today is that all of those parts is what makes up the transportation ecosystem in and around Littleton. And so each of these things is always there in some part, contributing in a different way, and it may be contributing in a different way in different parts of the community. And so as we go into this thing, we're really trying to help lay out sort of that holistic approach that it takes to manage traffic and transportation. And it's also a very exciting time in the business in the sense that our ability to start to adapt new technologies into transportation management is very exciting. One of the programs today with CDOT is the new VDX program that brings all your mobile devices and cars into real-time synchronization on a road, so you can do real-time traffic management that actually adapts to the vehicles and all those kind of things.
As long as it doesn't distract the driver.
That's correct. And so those are some of the really exciting things that are out there and being piloted right here in our state. We're the only state that has an autonomous Department of Transportation vehicle currently operating in it. Out there on the roads, the Scorpion truck is what we refer to it. That's a safety vehicle that has the tail that flops down for safety, for impact crashes. There is an autonomous one of those running around the state right now with a CDOT crew. So we like to think of ourselves from the innovative front as well. So with that, I'm going to actually, I think, flip it over to Ryan.
Aaron, take this first.
Aaron, okay. There we go. Thanks.
Good evening, everyone. So I'm just briefly going to touch on some of the projects we've done this year or currently working on. Probably the one that's most noticeable to all of you is the Broadway and County Line intersection where we redid the signal finally. I think this has been in the works for about 4 years that Tim's been working on it. And we added the southbound second left turn lane. That's been in operation now probably for about a month or so. We're still doing some punch list items to clean it up and finish it up. But the good news that we're getting from police that we're hearing so far is that they're noticing there's not been one major accident there since the work was done, which is really good news. And part of that's probably attributed to the additional capacity, but also we changed the north and south left turns to be protected only, which means they only can go when there's an arrow, as opposed to before they were protected permissive, meaning they could go on an arrow or on the green ball. We changed that because this is one of the highest accident intersections that we had in the city, and with the additional capacity of southbound and the limitation of having 2 left turn lanes, not being able to see as far, we wanted to go to protected only and have people turn the arrow, and it's working good so far. That's the good news. So that was a nice addition. The other things we've been working on, not quite as obvious and noticeable as that one, signal timing improvements has been a real focus for this last year. We've been working very closely with Dr. Cog, looking at Santa Fe, at Bowles, and Mineral, all 3 of those corridors, trying to improve the signal timing, not only during the peak hour, but also during the off-peak time. So in other words, during the middle of the day, when you don't have everyone driving to and from work.
So we control the timing on Santa Fe?
Yes, we do.
So is it state highway?
It is a state highway.
But we control that part?
Yes, we operate and maintain all the signals on Santa Fe within the city limits with the exception of County Line. That's the only one we don't. So Mineral all the way up to Prince. Bellevue obviously is not on Santa Fe anymore since that was grade separated a few years back. But yes, CDOT has the ability at any time to come and operate those if they want to, but we have what's called a Senate Bill 8, which turned over certain signals to us from the state, and they pay us basically a maintenance fee for them each year. I forget what it equates to, 47,000 or something. It's not enough, but it's something.
We don't charge a lot either for fees, so we'll take it.
Aaron, so
Thanks,
will
Aaron.
you explain the reason for changing the arrow functions at Mineral and Santa Fe? The turn?
So I believe what you're talking about is going from leading left turns to lagging left turns. Yeah. So,
the problem is what again?
Okay, so we used to have all the left turns come up first before the through vehicles would go. So you'd have opposing left turns, north and south go, and then the through vehicles would go. So we call those leading left turns, so they go first, as opposed to lagging left turns, which is where you allow the through vehicles to go, and then you turn those to red and allow the left turns to go. And what you're able to do, especially during peak hour, when you have more traffic going one way than another, if you lead versus lag, you can better coordinate with other signals adjacent to them. So in other words, what we try and do is create these green bands. I'll try not to get too technical, but basically, you know, when the light turns green, right, you want to get as much of a platoon of vehicles moving down the roadway, okay? And you want to keep them moving when they get to the next signal and the next signal and the next signal as much as possible. So the number that you can get through, we basically call that a green band that can keep going down the road. By adjusting some of the left turns so that they're leading or lagging allows you to get a bigger green band, especially when you have an intersection like Mineral where you know a lot of those people are going to turn also. So by lagging the left, sometimes you can wait till that platoon gets down there, make sure they're at the intersection first, then turn left, then turn the arrow green so that they can make the left turn. So, you know, it's just another tool that we can try and use to make the timing as efficient as possible. And when you specifically look at an intersection like Santa Fe and Mineral, where we're literally at capacity in almost every movement in the PM peak hour, meaning that we cannot fit any more vehicles through in those lanes than we currently have going, you're basically giving as much time to each movement all the way around the intersection as you possibly have. And when you have some movements that have even more volume than it can handle, you're trying to steal time away from the movements with less volume. And so anything we can do in the form of lead lag, that type of, to get more coordination, it just gets traffic moving that much better. The other major thing that we changed out there was the cycle lane. So in other words, if you sit at an intersection and it turns green, and if you were to sit there and wait until it goes through all the phases and turns green again, that's called a cycle lane. So typically, we have about 120-second cycle lengths is pretty typical in our city. Sometimes it's shorter than that, especially during off-peak times, middle of the night, that type of thing. But during peak hours, you'll sometimes increase that cycle length to try and get more vehicles through the intersection at one time. We increased those, we even tested out all the way up to 225 seconds at that intersection. So that's 3.5-minute long cycle length. And
It's fine if you're moving.
It is if you're moving. And what we found is we tested a whole bunch of cycle lengths, and what we found was we were trying to get the queues on Mineral and Santa Fe in the different directions. Specifically, if you've ever been out there in the PM peak hour, the queue on westbound Mineral goes all the way up the hill past South Park area and stuff. And we were trying to alleviate that as much as possible.
Past Windermere.
Yeah, at times it does go past Windermere, you're correct. And then also the southbound and northbound on Santa Fe, it really queues up quite a way. So longer cycle length, you get cars moving, you get them through quicker. That was the idea. What we found is we tested anywhere from the 120-second cycle all the way up to 225, and the queue lengths did not change very much. So what we settled on was a 180-second cycle, so a 3-minute cycle during the peak hour at Santa Fe and Mineral. And what that allowed us to do is actually do what we call a half cycle at Jackass and Mineral. So it goes 90 seconds. So it's turning over faster than the one at Santa Fe and Mineral. That allows cars on Long and Jackass that are trying to get out there to have more opportunities to get out. So we're just trying whatever we can at this point to move as much traffic through that area as we possibly can. And a lot of that credit goes to the people we've been working with at DRCOG. They went well above and beyond looking at these corridors to us. In fact, we heard a lot of swearing many times, and the fact that they said they have never encountered a corridor like this, like Santa Fe. It's just over capacity. And that's the type of message we're trying to convey to CDOT and the other agencies that we're trying to get this planning environmental linkages study going with all up and down that corridor, is that, you know, the capacity is reaching extreme points and we need to do something else. And it's not just in Littleton. I mean, they're seeing it up at Dartmouth and Santa Fe and at Oxford. I mean, there's other places that it's occurring to.
When they complete all of the lanes in Douglas County, it'll only get worse in that stretch.
That is the theory, yes. That's what we're afraid of. I mean, that's what called my attention to it the first time I heard that. You know, when I first started working here is when I started going to the CDOT Arapahoe County meetings, and the very first thing I heard was about this PEL study that had been done to the south and how it's going to have 8 lanes across the bridge. And my question was, well, what happens to those 8 lanes? Do they continue? And they said, well, we didn't study beyond county lines, so they don't continue. They stop. And I said, what are your future volumes going to be like down south? And they said, oh, it's going to get in the 40,000 range. I said, that's future, right? I said, you do know we have 57,000 right now on 4 lanes.
Yeah.
Can we do something up here? So, you know, that did caught everyone's attention, which is a good thing. But you're right, we're kind of behind them now. So we need to play a little catch up. So that's the reality of it. But as I'll get to a little bit later when we talk about it, you know, that's one of the agencies we're working with also is Douglas County. And hopefully we'll learn from their experiences doing that PEL study to help us with ours. So that's only good. Just a couple other real quick things to touch on. You know, we're looking at a lot of signage and striping modifications, opportunities, especially when we do these construction projects, either mill and overlays or these slurry seals and chip seals. So all these preservation and improvements we're doing to the quality of the roadway. We're trying to take that opportunity to evaluate our curb-to-curb street and see if there's another striping plan we should be putting on it. An example of that would be South Park Lane going down through the industrial part of South Park between Mineral and County Line. You might notice that we put bike lanes out there now. And it's to serve two purposes. One, believe it or not, that was a bike route. It's signed as one, but it had no bike lanes on it. And two, you know, it's signed at 30 miles an hour, and we are finding speeds a little higher than that because a lot of people are using it as a cut-through to get between Mineral and County Line. So narrow up the lanes a little bit. Hopefully it'll control the speed a little bit. So that's an example. Another one I just want to touch on that kind of goes with these safety implementations. We're trying to focus, especially around schools whenever we can. We've been working with Littleton Public Schools and specifically Littleton High School to kind of evaluate how traffic works coming in the morning and leaving in the afternoon. As you know, it's quite a surge in that area. They've done a lot of things to kind of spread out where drop-offs and pickups are at their school, and we've been working with them to re-stripe and re-sign their roadway in front of the school and kind of extend that to the other side, the west side of Broadway also, to kind of improve the flow in that area. We changed it so that they actually have turn lanes now, which they didn't before, to try and separate who's going through versus who's going to turn into the school. And then also to kind of help them going through that Broadway intersection, clarify what those different lanes mean. So those are just a couple projects I wanted to touch on right now, because we really want to get to, in the rest of the presentation, talking about what we're trying to do in the future here. So I'll kind of let Keith introduce what all we're going to talk about, and then we'll kind of all jump in here and add our 2 cents.
So what we decided to do is just kind of give you a sense of, we've talked intermittently as we've gone through things this year about some of the things that we're doing, and so these are the initiatives that you're going to be hearing and seeing about quite a bit in the future. We've already touched a little bit on Transportation Master Plan. Brent's going to talk about that. The design standards, we've talked briefly about that already a couple of weeks ago. TDM, Traffic Demand Management, that's something that's continues to grow in importance every day through ITS infrastructure. The Traffic Committee we're going to touch on, transportation engineering in general, right-of-way management, and where we're going with regional engagement as well as capital improvement planning. Those are all things we're going to touch on in the next few minutes.
So Transportation Master Plan that you've heard a little bit about, Transportation Master Plan is basically a blueprint for safe, convenient, and sustainable transportation system. It takes into account multimodal transportation options from light rail, bus service, pedestrians, and single occupancy vehicles. And it guides future development and land use, as well as it's guided by future land use. So as we work towards an overall comprehensive plan, the Transportation Master Plan is going to be one major component of that. So as we look at future changes in land use, the Transportation Master Plan will encompass some of those land use changes. Also will incorporate the Pedestrian and Bicycle Master Plan that was created a few years ago and will probably be updated as part of the Transportation Master Plan. And furthermore, another component of the comprehensive plan is supporting economic development goals. So that's supported by the Transportation Master Plan too. And I kind of already touched on these. So multimodal transportation system incorporates light rail, bus service, pedestrians, bicycles, single occupancy vehicles, as well as any transportation modes that may come up in the future. Who knows what those may be?
Jetpacks. I'm still waiting for that flying car.
Right.
We'll get the Hyperloop to start here, not there.
And what we're going towards is a term you may have heard before, which is complete streets. And complete streets looks at everything that's within the right-of-way. It's not just looking at the roadway surface. It's looking even from building to building and how the right-of-way is utilized from vehicle use, bike lanes, sidewalks, as well as green space, because green space is really important to incorporate into the right-of-way to soften the right-of-way for pedestrians and bicycles. And so complete streets is an initiative that a lot of cities have been working towards, and we will likely be incorporating that into the Transportation Master Plan as well.
So Brent, one of the questions that's come up is lighting on streets. both folks like some lights and they don't like other lights. How does that get incorporated into a concept, since Complete Streets basically has everything from building to building included?
Well, there's certainly something that could be incorporated into Complete Streets concept, whether we look at a policy of only lighting the intersections, or do we incorporate additional lighting for safety, and that's definitely a big policy decision that would have to be made.
Yeah, that's something where you work, in a situation like this where Excel's our partner there, we would typically look at those things with them. There's also been, there's been such advancement in basically light bulb technology over the last decade. A lot of places have moved to LED lights. There's some feedback about that, some being too bright. They cover a different expanse in that. So, that's part of building in it. And if you think about a Complete Streets concept, one of the things I like to point to is a typical downtown, historical downtown. And in most old downtowns, the right-of-way actually goes building front to building front, and oftentimes the facade of the building is actually sitting inside the right-of-way, very commonly. And so what you're thinking about is that entire experience through the corridor. And what I always find interesting here in Colorado is if you go back and look at pictures, historical pictures from downtowns in Colorado, Littleton, Longmont, Fort Collins, Loveland, the one thing that always jumps out at me is if you take a picture from 1950, 1960, even 1970, almost none of them have trees. And unless you're looking for it, you don't realize it. But next time you see one of those historical pictures, take a look at it. There's often not trees. And so the incorporation of trees makes a dramatic difference in things like that. And so there may not actually be physical green space, but you may have vertical green space that contributes to the experience for all the users across the situation. On the other hand, as a public works guy, every time I think about that, those big trees, they also shade the roadway, which makes winter maintenance hard. So you have to plan for all those things at the same time. So that's how the Complete Streets package allows everyone to operate safely. And you look at all the different modes, and then within the modes, for example, a young mother with 2 young children riding a bicycle does not want to go ride in a bike lane where the speeds exceed 20 or 25 miles an hour. There's no level of comfort there for them. Versus somebody like Aaron or I, who's more comfortable riding in a circumstance like that, or even in corridors with higher speeds. And so it's incorporating those different uses. How do you tie those, sort of green, to use the ski slope, the green, blue, and black level riders. How do you get those green and blue riders connected into, say, a bike trail situation? And how do all those parts and pieces fit together? And that's just part of the process of coming through a Complete Streets concept that extends out as a web and connects your community.
I have a question on the crosswalks on Milton Boulevard, the flashers over there, which I think are great. What are your thoughts on that now? You're eventually going to give us numbers on the use of them? Is that?
Yeah, we will at some point. Yeah, it took us a while to figure out how to collect that data. We finally have it figured out. So now we want to get a good enough amount where it means something.
And that's my area of the neck of the woods, and it's always great to see a flash because that means someone's actually going across. But it seems to slow the traffic down too. Because at Littleton Boulevard, they were, especially before the flashers, that was a heck of a long stretch, and people would really pick up the speed. Are you seeing, what's the benefit you're seeing there? Or not the benefit?
From a speed standpoint? Is that what you're asking for?
Yeah, any standpoint.
I think they're working really good. I think you're right. It's even when they're not flashing, I think it's just another form of calming that's out there. But that's typical of any roadway. The more things you put, on the sides, whether it be trees or lights or anything that makes people feel like there's something encroaching on them, the slower they go in general. And I think we need to, and we're going to talk about that a little later, about corridors in general, and how do we treat corridors? Because the tendency can be to look at individual incidents, this intersection, how it's operating, or this location, this block, but we really need to look bigger at whole corridors because lots of different things can influence them that you can do, anywhere from the land use that's occurring on the sides to what the pedestrian activity is and stuff in that area to the cars. So you have to kind of look at it all together. So we're going to talk a little about that later.
Thank you.
So one of the initiatives we're going to be undertaking in 2018 is the development of transportation design standards. So transportation design standards, essentially establish performance standards for a transportation network. So if you remember the telephone town hall, Mark talked about level of service, and for instance, our intersections, we rate those on a level from A to F, A being the best and F being the worst in terms of congestion. So that's one component that will be incorporated into these design standards. Another thing we'll be looking at is street widths and analyzing whether we'll have different street widths for residential streets, collector streets, arterial streets. We'll analyze whether or not we want sidewalks on one side or both sides of those different classifications. So that's something will be part of the design standards as well. It also helps to provide a platform to assess development impacts on the community. So as we have new development coming in, what impacts are those developments going to have on the roadway, and do roadways need to be modified because of that impact? We started this process about 2 years ago, and as we had a lot of staff turnover, we put that on hold. And now that we've got a little bit more stability, we're picking that up again and hope probably by April to have the design standards wrapped up. Keith, do you want to talk about travel demand management a little bit? It's kind of a new concept. It's not new, but it's newer to us.
Yeah, I mean, from a TDM perspective, if you think about if we take the Santa Fe corridor, every less vehicle that you have or is deferred from going through that at the AM and PM peak, you're buying yourself time to build capacity. So what you're doing is by really focusing on alternative modes throughout corridors and partnering with other entities to help support and drive some of those, you have an ability to do different things in your corridor. If all of a sudden through TDM there was 10% less vehicles going through Mineral and Santa Fe, makes a big difference. Likewise, and Littleton's fortunate. I mean, you do have, there is light rail coming up and down, that makes a difference for sure. There's no question about that. On the other hand, it also contributes to congestion because all those people that are south of the Mineral Station now are coming into that spot. So it's all part of that. And so TDM, what you see is you partner with, there's a number of organizations here in Colorado. Dr. Cog's a big leader in that, in working with partners to create TDM incentives to incentivize alternative mode users, to have reward systems for that. So maybe somebody takes an express bus versus rides with somebody else, or focus on carpooling and group carpooling. And those are the kind of things that TDM helps with. And that's something that we engage with and in support. It's not something that we're going to lead, but it will be a strong component of our transportation planning as well.
Another initiative we're going to be undertaking in 2018 is the development of a traffic committee. So this traffic committee will be comprised of staff from the Public Works Department, the Police Department, and the City Manager's Office. This will provide input from a variety of different perspectives, and this is something that I had used in my previous city and found it to be very effective because it had those variety of opinions coming in. We're looking at it from a physical operations standpoint, we're looking at an enforcement standpoint, and we're looking at it from a policy perspective as well. This committee will review requests for signing, striping, speeding, things like that. And one of the benefits of having such a committee is going to be, as well as transparency, but it's also documentation and record keeping. Often we've been getting requests in that come usually through Aaron and Tim, and they'll respond to these requests, but we don't have a good record keeping mechanism for those. Sometimes we'll get similar requests. We don't know if we've got multiple requests coming in from the same intersection or if it's just a one-time type of incident that may have occurred. So it's really important to document these requests as they're coming in. Yeah.
What does speeding mean in this context?
So we may get requests or concerns from a citizen that they feel that excessive speeding is occurring at a given section of the street.
So it's not a request for speeding,
no.
It's about speeding.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes,
we can evaluate those too, but they might be turned down.
Request
the way I drive, I'm always requesting speeding, so that's okay with me.
Yes, observation of excessive speed.
So I've become aware that
all of the accidents end up being coded, GIS coded by the Department of Revenue for an interesting source at the state level. But that pertains to all that involve an enforcement officer somehow putting that code in the system. And that's available across the metro region, if not across all Colorado. Is this the kind of group that's going to be taking a look at those things? Because I've had both comments like, thank goodness we've gotten rid of our photo enforcement, to folks that say, there are people behaving badly, can we have it back again? So, full spectrum on something like that. Is this where this, at least at the staff conversation level, will occur?
Yeah, it's a collaborative situation, and that's what I think is most important, is our ability to collaborate with enforcement and policy to really move towards that direction. You know, like for example, just a couple of days ago, Tim put out our quarterly report on the big 10 accident intersections and how does that trend versus the last 3 years. What are our bike and pedestrian interactions look like, and those kind of things. And that's part of that. It helps us. That kind of data is critically important when you start looking at, if you have a neighborhood that comes in and says everybody's speeding. Okay, so let's look at the data, and then we take the next step, which is things like license plate surveys. And typically in a neighborhood, 75% of the speeders are their neighbors. And then you move to the next question about cut-through traffic. And so those are all data points you combine to bring together to help create, I think, more robust decision-making, which is where we want to be from a traffic management standpoint.
You mentioned cut-through traffic. I mean, with the congestion that we notice on some of the major arterials, certainly there is an increase in cut-throughs. And those are generally somewhere in excess of the posted limits because folks are more concerned about destination at the moment than necessarily safety. How does that information, are you...
Yeah, we look at all that. That's the stuff that comes in. It's very important for us to look at. A classic supergiant cut-through situation for us right now, we often talk about it through neighborhoods. The construction on 470 is pushing cut-through traffic into Santa Fe and Mineral.
County line.
Yeah, county line. So, that's the kind of data is an organization that we're tackling more robustly. Having, Aaron as part of the team and Tim and the depth of talent I think we have now, it gives us a greater chance to be able to capitalize on that big data that we not necessarily have in the past.
Well, it could either be better or worse if the railroad did not renew the lease that CDOT has on the northbound Santa Fe lanes, so that, if we just didn't have northbound in Santa Fe, then
for those that don't know what Phil's referring to, there was a striping project that was going on and a paving project with CDOT that would help in the safety and flow down there. And in the middle of the project, CDOT said, oh my gosh, part of this road is in the railroad's right of way. And so they stopped. Just completely stopped. And so we've shaken some trees around that. The initial estimate to get that deal done to have access to the right-of-way, even though we've had it for 50 years, access to the right-of-way, the initial estimate was 37 months. And we've been able to spend some time, and we're hopeful that CDOT will maybe have that done by the end of the year, actually.
Where's the location of that?
It's about where the Dad Clark Gulch Bridge is. Do you know where that is? It's just south of there, and it extends up almost to Aspen Grove Way. And it's only on the northbound lanes. And if you look at it on a map, it cuts here and there. And CDOT has this issue in a couple other places too. On Highway 6 up north, they have it where for whatever reason, there's still some railroad right of way that sits in the middle of a road that was never turned over. So they just have to clean it up.
37 months.
That's the railroad, not CDOT. I can say that with assurance.
So I've noticed the traffic count across the road, pneumatic tubes. There seems to be more traffic count going on around the city. Can you comment on that?
If you can wait for 2 slides, I'll
Easy moves. Mr. Mayor.
I think the one thing that I see that I get a lot of criticism on is striping. And I know it's a very manpower intensive, and I know a lot of issues, especially winters in Colorado and abrasives. But I really feel like we are not where we want to be as a city with the striping, and particularly to help the drivers when there's wet on the roadway. I don't think we're using the most reflective or best, heaviest out there, and then also just the upkeep, just the upkeep. And if we're talking about within that lane trying to make the total use, there are a lot of issues there that are created because of striping. Comment?
Yeah, first to talk about the material that we use. So there's basically three different types of materials you can use for striping. One is just paint. It's regular paint, and usually you put glass beads in with the paint to get the reflectivity out of it when headlights hit it. The second is called epoxy. So it's a little more of like a tape type of a application. Usually lasts a lot longer, is more visible, it stays more vibrant longer too. And then the last is thermoplastic, which is where you actually melt, it's almost like plastic, down onto the surface of the roadway. Typically we do that with like crosswalks and turn arrows, things like that. What we've been trying to do, especially with a lot of these construction projects, is put down epoxy as a part of those. So we've been calling that out because that'll last a lot longer. The problem is for our maintenance crew to go out and put epoxy down on all the streets, it's just not, it's not reasonable. One, because of the cost, but two, because of the time it takes to do it. So we restrict them only to paint. And what they've been doing, typically our program has been to paint twice a year. And we've got a lot of road miles to cover and a lot of paint to cover in basically a very short amount of time with a crew that only has one truck and one walk behind type painter that they can use. And we also currently paint Columbine Valley's streets and Englewood streets also. So they have to take time out of their summer to go and do those two. We only do those applications once a year in each of those cities, but it does take a couple weeks out of what they could be doing on our streets.
So we do that for free, though.
We recoup 20% of our work.
So I can't specifically speak to that.
So we charge Columbine Valley for the paint and the time, and Englewood we charge them for the paint, not the time. That's the way the current situation is.
I think we just have another negotiating.
That was right.
Counselor,
big fancy clubhouse.
They do something.
we also have some other exchanges with them. It's
Englewood,
with
yes.
Englewood. That's not just a single standalone. Like
No.
they take care of the milling machine, and the rent we're paying on the milling machine, I would prefer not to say it in public compared to the marketplace. We don't want Englewood to know. So it's good for us. So those are the kind of things that, we're so close together. It's good to do some horse trading. We don't all want to own the same equipment. And it's a perfect example of that. So that said, teaming with neighboring communities is only more efficient and effective for all of us at the end of the day. So
It's like harvest. I feel a little.
It's, I think, an issue that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a good point. It's certainly something we want to keep working on as we move forward and planning for the future is, what is the investment we want to make on the roadways? And we'll get to this at the end of this discussion, but just to touch on it, it helps the more years you look out in planning to be able to look at the investment that you're going to put forward in something like striping on your roadways, because it is very important.
You change the stripes on eastbound Bowles and Santa Fe, and that's made a huge difference at the right time of day. It really does, so thanks.
There's little things that we can do and there's big things we can do. So we just need to keep evaluating those as we get the opportunity. The one other thing I want to say about this traffic committee before I move on to talking more about transportation engineering is that, and I think we might have missed this and put it on the slide, is that it's not just about when requests come in. The great thing that it'll be about these groups getting together, Public Works, Police, and City Manager's Office, all having a regular meeting time, is we can each bring up issues that we're dealing with, and if we're having problems with cut-through traffic or speeding that we're witnessing, we can talk to the police about it and say, hey, can you try and go enforce this, and let's see what happens there. We can talk to City Manager's Office about policies and stuff, and maybe we need to write better and new policies on certain issues that we're addressing. So it's not just going to be to take in requests that come from residents, but also internal issues that we see to try and get it resolved.
But something that came up 2 weeks ago, and so I'm not sure where it fits, is LPS is looking at changing their start times, which is going to impact when bus traffic, if not other traffic, flows.
Those are all the kind of things that, as we talk to them, and we have a relationship with LPS, and I expressed this when we had the joint board and council meeting. When we have to, parents would prefer to drive right in the lobby if they could. So, we have to work, and that's something that we're attuned to all those things. There's other communities that have already done that in the country. So we would look to those discussions to, we'd reach out to those communities and say, hey, what happened? Tell us what happened on day one, and then tell us what happened after the system adapted 3 or 4 months down the road. So that's important for us to do. That's that collaborative, outward-looking approach to the fact that in a transportation world, your citizens don't care where your city boundaries are. They don't. And we as transportation leaders have to take that into account when we do what we do.
It's true.
All right. I just want to touch on, I'm not going to cover everything that we do related to transportation engineering. I did want to kind of focus on these 4 because they've been the type of things that we've been coming up that people have asked us about and that we've been trying to address most recently. So I'm going to look at information gathering, how that comes about. One of you mentioned the pneumatic tubes that we have out there. Pedestrian bicycle safety, that's been a key issue that a lot of people have been talking to us about. Corridor studies, like I mentioned before, that I was going to talk a little about that, and then traffic calming also. That kind of ties into this traffic committee we talked about, but it is a little different. It's dealing directly with neighbors, and Tim will talk about that.
Aaron?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but picture triggered something. We had a citizen, we had a citizen came down at our last council meeting with talking about some of the concerns that she has, and we have also voiced that, and I think we've also talked to you guys about it. The Broadway and Dry Creek and the light pole that extends over and it only shows 3 lanes, but it should show 4, and we know we have to redo the whole thing and it's going to be a lot of money. Where is that anywhere on the work list? Is that a funding issue? Is that
It's definitely a funding issue, yes. Yeah. But we have done something. So one thing we changed out there, and I don't know if people have noticed or not, is instead of having it come up so that, again, this is the lead leg lefts, right? We talked about that at Santa Fe and Mineral. So previously we had on Broadway, the north and southbound were leading left turns. So when it comes up, you get a green arrow for the 2 left turn lanes. They go, right? One will shut off before the other if there's more volume, or they'll both shut off at the same time, and then the throughs go, okay? And the concern that people were having was when that green arrow comes up, someone in that adjacent through lane that's really lined up with that arrow will start going, thinking it's theirs. So what we changed is we made it a lead arrow for the left turn northbound and a lag arrow for the left turn southbound. What that allows us to do is when the green arrow comes up, the green balls come up at the same time. So everybody goes northbound all at the same time. Then when the left turns are done, that goes to a red arrow, through traffic's already moving, okay? That eventually will shut off, and then we allow the southbound left to go. So that way you're not running into that issue where you have a green arrow turning over a through lane and they don't have the right to go at the same time. So good. I don't know if you've heard anything, if that's helping or not helping, but that was at least an interim step we could take until we can get to the point of replacing that mast arm. I do want to emphasize though, everyone's focused on this one because it's the most recent one that everyone's become aware of, but we have several locations like that. So if we're really considering that that's as big an issue that we need to replace that pole and mast arm, we really should be doing that at all the locations like that. And there's some really major
What are you calling it again?
Pole and mast arm?
Mast arm.
So it's the single pole and the mast arm is the part that comes out and holds all the signal heads.
I just your one word.
So the issue is that the mast arm itself that hangs over the roadway is not long enough. And the reason it's not long enough is because when Littleton Village was started to develop and we had them redo the intersection at Fremont and the intersection at Dry Creek, I won't reserve any judgment, I wasn't here at the time, but what happened was we allowed them to move those poles to a new location rather than getting a new signal pole and a new mast arm. When they did that, because we added essentially another northbound lane, it pushed the pole further away from the roadway, so it doesn't reach out as far. It can't extend all the way out to that left turn lane anymore. That's the issue. My experience in the past, when I've dealt with developments like that, we always make them buy a new signal pole and mast arm so that it is the right design. It's unfortunate. That happened in this case. At some point, we'll get that corrected. But it takes time and it takes money. That's the problem.
Keith, I need a managed time here, so can we wrap this up in 13 minutes?
Sure.
Okay, sure.
Go ahead.
Thanks.
No more questions for you though, Randy.
So just quickly, the reason we collect data, okay, we do volume counts. Those are the pneumatic tubes you see on the ground, and we also do it in the form of video cameras, which you probably don't notice. And those are collecting data also. We hire a company to do that one time a year. We previously, before I started here, did about 20 locations every year. And we tried to cover the whole city in a 2-year period. So we do 20 one year, 20 the next, and try and cover as much of the city as we could. Tim and I kind of talked through it when I first started here, and we decided it's been a long time since we've really comprehensively collected data in the city. So we identified over 80 locations to count last year, another 80 locations this year. And once we get that data, what we're going to do with it is a key map that we keep is a classification map. So it has all our roadways in the whole city, and it classifies them, whether they're a residential, local street, all the way up to an arterial, major arterial street. So it's a lot of that's based on what kind of speeds do you allow on those streets, what kind of land use is on those streets, and specifically what kind of volume is on those streets. So by doing this comprehensive count, we can reevaluate that classification map and make sure it's up to date on what it should be. The reason that's important is because it feeds into development and what's required of different types of developments based on what kind of road is adjacent to their property. So we want to make sure those are all accurate so we're getting the right type of development done. So we do counts on roadways, we do them at intersections also. We're trying to expand the capability of our signal equipment right now to allow us to constantly count at intersections. We aren't quite there yet, but we're confident that we're going to get there really soon. We've been working with IS to help us with our communications. So in other words, taking what's happening out in the field at an intersection and getting that information back here to the office so we can collect that data. We have a plan that will upgrade all that communication. We're waiting on one minor thing, and that's a new antenna to go up on the hospital. And once that happens, we're going to put in all new radios throughout the city, and we'll have that capability, hopefully, to send video back to the office. That's how much the bandwidth will increase, and we'll be able to start counting and getting a lot more data when we need it.
And if I could interject, in long term, you've heard both Ken and Keith talk about a fiber optic network that would connect all of our signals. That would help that connectivity.
And that's certainly ideal. Right now, we only have a little fiber, and that's mainly, we piggyback on CDOT. So they have it down Santa Fe, and it comes up Main Street and comes back to the building here. They manage it through. So we have that fiber that we can key on right now, but we want to obviously expand that a lot further. The other thing I want to touch on is accidents. So we collect crash history. I think, Phil, you mentioned it earlier. The way the state gets that information is from all the local entities. So the police go out and identify an accident, they fill out a form, it comes back to us, we get them monthly, and we actually, Tim, codes all that information in. And then we send that off to the state. All the cities do that so they can have a comprehensive database. The reason we think it's so important for us particularly is Tim does these quarterly reports and then annual comparisons so that we can look at what are the trends. A good example of that, of something we wouldn't have noticed unless we had this accident data, is Maplewood and Santa Fe. It's a minor intersection, probably most people don't even know where it is. It's right by the Jazz Car Wash. Well, we were finding one time, all of a sudden we have all these left turn accidents there. We're like, why? It's such a minor street with so few vehicles turning in. Well, we did an investigation and learned it's because that outside lane is flying past when the other two are queued up. So we're working with CDOT to get all that striped differently out there so you won't be able to make a left turn there anymore. And it'll make it a little safer out there. So that's just an example. What's that?
Are you talking to Keith? Not this Keith.
You mean the car wash? No, we will be meeting with them to talk about it.
It's tough to be in an accident when your car is just washed.
That's a bummer.
Or to watch your car when it was just an accident.
Well, that way this could go a while, so we won't. But if you're removing that, what are you providing for access?
They can get there right the next street.
We'll come back on that. We'll do a separate report on that.
It's the same thing. So
it isn't the same. It really isn't the same thing. It's further away from the signal. So there's less queuing past that point. That's why we evaluate it. But that's a whole other topic. It's just an example of how we use that accident data. The other way we get data is through development traffic impact studies that we require when someone is developing here, and then just working with the other agencies like we've mentioned already. In the interest of time, I'm not going to belabor a lot of this, but again, I mentioned pedestrian and bicycle safety is a key issue that we're focusing on. Someone mentioned the RFPs. I think Jerry, you mentioned that before. We're looking to expand that to a lot more locations in the next year. We've identified where we want them to go. We just need to identify the funding for it. And we're also looking at another application called raised tables. I'm sure you're familiar with these if you've ever been to Boulder. So it's where the crosswalk is raised above the roadway. So it stays at the level of the sidewalk and cars have to go over a table essentially. It's like a ramp. It raises the pedestrians up so they're more visible. It makes them more of a priority. A great application for it is when you have a free right turn movement. That way you can kind of slow down and control speed so they don't get too high. Going through that right turn and conflicting with pedestrians.
Are you looking for something more of a flasher at the courthouse?
You're talking about by Bemis, between Bemis and Court.
Yeah.
That one's already, the equipment's here, it's ready to go in. Okay. We're waiting for the Grove to be at the point where we can put it in. They're redoing that whole sidewalk in front of their property. The other way we're looking at is sidewalks, obviously making them wider and keeping them detached helps make it safer for pedestrians. I mentioned separate bike lanes, and we also have shared lanes out there, but we're adding more bike lanes where it makes sense on our wider roadways. That has a twofold benefit. It provides a place for bikers who are comfortable, if you're one of the higher level bikers, to be in the road, but at the same time it has the perspective from drivers that it narrows up your lane and you drive a little slower, whether you realize it or not. Corridor studies, I mentioned that we're going to talk about that. There's many reasons we do corridor studies, whether it's the capacity as a problem in operations, whether it's access control, if you have too many driveways, you want to look at how many driveways you're allowed to different land uses. It's the land uses themselves, what kind, whether you have residential or commercial or industrial along those roadways. And we're always looking for opportunities, either on our own or to work with others. And some examples of that here, are, like I mentioned, the Dr. Cog, we're working on signal timing. That's one aspect that we look at corridor studies. I mentioned the PEL study that we're doing and working with Douglas County to the south. But then, the example is Platte Canyon Road. So we have a task force that I sit on with Jefferson County, Arapahoe County, Town of Columbine Valley, CDOT, and we all meet regularly to talk about how we're going to handle Platte Canyon. Right now we have initiatives at Bowles and Mineral to improve those intersections, and we're just given some faster funds, which is safety fund money, through CDOT to help improve those intersections. So in the next year, we hope to be designing and implementing some improvements that will be for both traffic, driver traffic, and pedestrian and bicycles to make it safer for them also. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to Tim to talk about traffic calming.
Thanks.
You have 30 seconds.
30 seconds. Neighborhood Traffic Management Program, if you don't know, council adopted it in 1999, a long time ago. We've done a lot of traffic calming since then around town, circles, speed humps, chicanes, neck downs. I might be missing a few. It's time for us to refresh that and revise it. So we are in the process of doing that right now, comparing it to other cities, other entities. As far as the neighborhood engagement part of that, we always did have a neighborhood engagement part of it, but we're going to kind of go the method and the way that we're doing other neighborhood engagement currently, because we think that works better, so we're going to do that. We're going to talk about cost sharing, which we haven't really done in the past with traffic calming. In the past, we've just funded it as the city, instead of sharing it with either the neighbors or maybe our neighboring communities if it benefits them. So that's traffic calming.
Question on that. Rather passionate citizen approached me the other day about speed bumps, that they should be meant to control your speed theoretically close to the speed limit, but a lot of them you have to essentially stop the car. I mean, it's like 5-10 miles an hour to get over it, and then you accelerate away, which I would think would be pretty annoying if you live there. Mm-hmm. Is there any reason they have to be as big as they are? Is there a way to make those so that it keeps you from speeding, but doesn't really
So that's one of the things that when we're talking about revising it, right now our criteria for a speed hump, and a speed bump is in a shopping center parking lot. Speed hump is out on the street. Speed humps are 12 feet wide. You don't know that unless you measure it.
Okay.
Those are about 6 inches. Anyway, our criteria right now is it's 12 feet wide, it slopes up, it's a little flat on the top, it is 3 to 3.5 inches tall. It is supposed to do exactly what you said. It's supposed to have the person go the speed limit, okay? Or a little slower, not 5 miles an hour. So I can tell you that to make it 3.5 inches high with asphalt, asphalt is not, Brent would probably agree with this, it's not something you can absolutely to a T make it 3 inches high every single time. It's hard to work with like that, but we try to do it the best we can.
We have some in town that we wouldn't install that way today.
Okay.
Let's just put it that way.
All right, thank you.
Right-of-way management. Right-of-way permits, like all the development that's going on in town, we have lots more right-of-way permits in the last couple of years than we've had before. We are, again, looking at changing our right-of-way permit and basically what the criteria or requirements are for you. This is when a utility comes in and wants to do a cut in the street to put a new gas line in or a new water line or something like that. We're looking at, again, at other cities and from the new staff what they are used to doing somewhere else to make those patches look better than they do. An example, Littleton Boulevard in between Crocker and the railroad tracks, okay? If you've driven over that, you know what I'm talking about. Centennial has a requirement where they go halfway across the road. You have to repave halfway across the road, no matter how big your cut is, okay? So that's one of the things that we're looking at for that. Timeline for that, spring next year to issue new types of right-of-way permits.
Who did the work on Broadway, or on County Line by Broadway?
The signal?
The road patches?
Oh, you're talking east and west of there? That was XL or one of their subcontractors. And it's based on our current, but
They're
yeah.
horrible.
Yeah, our current right-of-way management is not as strong as most of our peer communities, so that's why we're evaluating it.
And I would add that Denver Water probably knows that because I received a lot of concerns, and of course I lived in the area. It's marginal at best, and it's not going to maintain any kind of long-term viability for us. We're paying for it's just not correct, and we shouldn't be accepting it.
Do we have to accept it?
Yeah.
Do we have to accept that?
Well, right now, I mean, our pavement requirements and repairs need some work. What I'm used to in the cities I've been in, we've had pavement made in surcharges where we do exactly what you talk about in Centennial. You either have to do like half the street, or you have to do crack seal around the patch, and then you have to slurry seal or micro seal a piece of the road over top of the patch, going like a certain number of feet in each direction. And the idea is to try to restore recently redone road back to that standard. Right now, we don't have that type of provisions in the code. That's one of the things I'm working with Public Works is we are going to get those kinds of requirements because that's what we should have.
Okay. Thank you.
So just a couple of slides here to finish up. You know, we're tied into it. You know, we're fortunate and unfortunate to be in 3 counties, which creates some extra burden actually. But these are all some of our regional partners. We're tied into all of them. One of the ones I'd like to highlight on that list actually is DRCOG. You've heard about the PEL study. We've talked about that in the past, that we're going to be tackling that here going forward on Santa Fe with our partners here in the region. I'll just be pretty direct about this. Littleton's only received 1 DRCOG grant in 30 years. If you show up and participate, they're going to feel sorry for you at least every 5 years. This is the easiest way to play it. But you got to play to do that, and that's not something that we've historically done, and that is something that's very high on our radar screen. Something like Mineral in Santa Fe, we got to start the torture drip on the forehead of the region, that's got to be in the transportation tip.
At least a low-flow garden hose.
That's correct. I'd much rather take a fire hose, but I know it's a touchy issue right now. So we got to get that in the tip because that's the only way it's going to get funded. So that's important to us as we go forward as an organization, and actually as elected officials, that will be something that you will play an important role in as well as we move forward. So with that, one last slide here. You know, and I've touched on this a few times when we've talked about transportation and other areas and asset management. What the City Council has historically seen in this community, as well as the citizens at large, is one-year CIPs, basically 1 year of planning, which puts you you're basically in a reactive mode. A process of addressing the worst first, which is not really the best plan, because as we've talked about, if you got a road that's got a PCI of 20 and you go out there and pave it, it's going to be in the same state 2 years later. You might as well just go tape $100 bills to the road and let them blow off in the breeze at that point.
Or toilet paper.
Yeah, exactly.
Single ply, though.
Exactly. Yeah. So somebody's got to do it. So, so we've used limited tools. We've been reactive. We haven't had collaboration regionally. What we anticipate you seeing going forward, it's going to take us a little time to get there, but 1, 3, and 5 year CIPs with dollars tied to them, funded and unfunded lists, more detailed cost projections, targeted revenue needs, as well as a little bit more proactive customer service. That's the traffic calming that we're talking about, as well as our focus on preservation and moving forward from that perspective. So those are some of the things that you'll start to see as we go forward. It's going to take us, you know, that hill's a little bit steep right now, but we're going to get there. And that's where, as a team, we're targeted going. And I know that every member of our team is focused on moving us in that direction as well. So with that, that's, you know, our last slide. And we'll take any questions to finish up at this point.
I'm going to make a comment for the others in the room. The Transportation Improvement Program and the allocations are changing in this next cycle, in that there's going to be a regional pot and a sub-regional pot. Currently, the sub-regional is scheduled at the county levels, which means we have 3 counties to participate in. So when Keith is mentioning, we span that. So hopefully our discussions will be coherent among the 3 counties. But we do have a relationship with every one of those counties, so it's not going to be a surprise on that front, but it creates a different kind of opportunity, and it's more important that we do partner with our fellow municipalities in Arapahoe County particularly.
Yeah, and in fact, Brett and I have been at a conference the last 2 days, and every one of those jurisdictions, our peers, we are spending time with the last couple of days, just kind of talking about that and where we need to go collectively, and that Littleton is going to be talking to them in a very different way than they've historically seen. So,
very refreshing. Thank you.
Yeah.
Can you translate symbols there?
Sure. The big yellow one is a street sign. No, I'm just the symbols that are up there, basically the top one is, you know, what causes traffic congestion out there on our roadways, and about half of it really is capacity. Yeah. Bottlenecks. Bottlenecks. You know, just lack of capacity for the volumes that you have.
We're just rotating around?
Yep, the 15% is construction work zones. 10% working your way down is bad weather as well. And then you've got poor signal timing, which Aaron's trying to fix, like he talked about earlier. And then finally, traffic incidents. That's, you know, if you think about it, you throw a corridor with limited capacity, and then you have one accident in one lane, and then emergency services got to take up a whole other lane. You know, the whole thing goes. But to show you how you can change that with technology, in the I-70 Mountain Corridor, with some of the technology changes that they've incorporated, this is a stat I heard literally just this morning, incident turnover time has gone from 22 minutes average to down to 10. And that's solely based on utilization of technology to increase response times, and also the ability to get them through shoulder service and some other things. So that's the kind of things where you need to look at the ability to bring technology and operations together to create greater traffic flow in your community. So
it's exciting stuff.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.
Very well done, guys. Thank you.
Okay. Item D, it's item ID number 17-309. It's a study session on council priority 4, design guidelines and Littleton downtown design standards and guidelines are proposed. There is a huge piece of material available, and we are not referring to that. Sorry.
Not gonna go through that.
No. Page by page, we'd be here at 7 in the morning getting breakfast.
Yeah, we can order that now.
300.
Yeah, with the traffic, it'd be morning before we.
We've got a PowerPoint primarily for this.
Good. Yeah, I saw that when I was going through the packet going, oh my
It's
God.
only like 2 pages, and my staff
And that one-
communication was only like a page and a half, so don't
That was
worry.
only
That
the
was
set.
just the backup material. Do you know
Oh. And do you want to play Minecraft? Is that what you want off there?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Sorry. Do you have it on the desk? Oh, it's right there.
Yes, you are.
Okay. So yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, Council. Thank you. Appreciate your time this evening. And wanted to come back to talk about the priority about the design guidelines was the general topic, priority 4, that you all had just identified earlier. And earlier, a couple months ago, we came in front of you and offered a way to start this project, and that was to take on a review of our existing Littleton Downtown Design Standards and Guidelines. And this is what was attached just for reference in your packets, but just so you knew what it was. And at that time,
It scared me when I saw it.
at that time, it seemed that it was like too big. We wanted to take on the whole project, and it was going to take several months. So you guys, with comments, said, hey, rethink this and come back with a shorter turnaround time, and how do we want to tackle this? So that's the purpose of the presentation today. This is just the one map from here to tell you what we're talking about. Really, it's the football area, if you will, and within that there are 8 sub-districts of this existing document. So that's just more of the map. We can come back to that if we need to. And the proposal is to take, so this document was adopted in 2006 after an extensive public, community, historic preservation, planning board, council discussion. And the outcome of that is like 100 and some odd pages. And it is set up so that you have objectives, which gives you the general idea for all of those different district areas. And then there are guidelines and standards. And all applications that come in, development applications come in within this area, and whichever sub-district, then they are reviewed against these standards and guidelines. The way it's written is that applications must meet all of the standards, and then you may use a guideline if you can't meet a standard. So the proposed scope coming back to you is we'd like to do a phase 1, if you will. First of all, there's also outdated language in here referencing old code sections that are not in the code anymore. The Development Review Committee, as well as the Transit Impact Zone, I think is what that was called. So we need to, that's not in our zoning code anymore, so we'd like to clean that up. We'd like to take on the project to take all of the guidelines and turn those into standards, or at least there are some we'd have to massage a little bit, but really that would be the idea, to take the guidelines, make them standards, update the photos. All the photos in this document are of pictures outside of Littleton, so we'd like to make them more real-time and local, as well as to add some, there are some sketches and some diagrams of how to interpret some of the guidelines, or excuse me, the design elements, and then to reformat it. This is so big because there's 8 sub-districts. They all talk the same topics of site layout, design, architecture, trash enclosures, open space, landscaping, and that we'd like to create one document that says if you're in any of those, districts, here's all of the standards that apply. And then for each standard that's different for each sub-area, then it would be sub-area 8 has 1, 2, because they're repeating. The majority of these things are repeating 8 times.
So if it's unique to only 3, then it'll be listed once, but applicable
yes.
to.
Yes, correct. But it would be an easier way to format the document and easier to understand and read for everyone.
So if I wanted to see what is applicable for number 1, so I have to go through the whole.
Well, the paper copy, you have tabs, but yes, the online version, you would have to find sub-area 1 in the title, and then you would work through that 30 pages, 40 pages. And then sub-area 2, same thing. The majority of them, what I'm saying, they have the same requirements. So we want to have a document that has, here's all the required standards that apply to any project in this entire area. And then if there's 2 or 3 that are specific for sub-area 1, then you would just see those 2 or 3 unique to that sub-area.
Will it be a cross-reference then, so I don't have to like flip through every page? So I can look, for 1, I can just...
Yeah. Okay. Yep, so that would be the intention. So that is this page. And so we anticipate this type of a review would take about 3 months to start. Staff's prepared to start in November, and December, January would be done around February. I did want to offer one other thing. So that's...
What, you'll be done with what by February?
The review of this. If you like this approach where we take basically the guidelines, turn them into standards, clean up the outdated code language, add updated photos and a few updated graphics, about that amount of time. Oh yes ma'am.
So in some of the language, like X should such and such, is should a mandate
for the most part?
When I was reading all of this, and then I see what's downtown, it didn't look like all the shoulds, since this was created, have been required.
So the way that the document was written is we said all the standards needed to be met, but if a project couldn't meet that for some reason, they could look at a guideline and choose that as an option. So that's how the document was written. And so what we're proposing is that we take the standards that are required and make all of the guidelines also a requirement.
And so should is kind of permissive, and you would go to will or something.
Must, shall. Yeah, working with the attorney.
No, we would basically, you'd have the standards would be you shall meet these. Right now you get kind of into this amorphous where you can meet a standard, but if you can't meet a standard, well then you have the option of going to the guidelines. And it creates a lot of contradiction because the guideline may not really be as definite as the standard. So, and of course, it's kind of like the Supreme Court sometimes says, well, you can't do certain things because it's an undue burden. Well, I would tell you, pretty much all applicants will always find, well, the standard's an undue burden, so I want to do the guideline. And that, it's just a very convoluted process, and the goal is to get to a process. I walk in, I look at the book, here's the standards, I'm an applicant, I know I have to meet those standards, period. And then I look at the subdivision district, and I go, oh, I have these 3 standards to meet as well. So it's straightforward, you know exactly what the rules are.
And to that point, I think, I'm sorry, just one more thing. I think the other idea about that is then it's cleaned up so everyone walking in knows exactly what the standards are. So there's no applicant, community, staff, all of us are really, it's a much cleaner way to manage it.
An example of that is we had Littleton Boulevard design guidelines, and the Grove decided not to, they weren't interested in it, so they just came right out of the sidewalk. If that was a design standard, they would have had to have an increased setback, which would have helped us in that area. So, and there may have been other things there, but that's some of the things in here. For example, this calls for the facade of a building, that generally the front of the building to face the street. And now some of them are facing sideways, and you're getting the side of a building facing the street, which is a real visual headache when you see these things. So that's the kind of issue that we're talking about there. Because the real intent is to keep Littleton's character and sense of place in the face of development pressure.
So that's the proposal with one other option idea, if you will. Let's see, I guess the only other thing going back to that first one, the pros of that, I can't speak, would be that we would end up, as we've just said, with a clean, consistent document that we all can understand. It's an easy, quick action, if you will, like, not quick, but certainly within 3 months is a pretty good time to make some dramatic impact to how these are being written as well as interpreted. And the downside, I guess, is that it would take that amount of time. So one other thing we want to throw out there is there might be a different way to think about this altogether, a different approach, again, to clean up the outdated reference, and instead of changing any of the guidelines to standards, to say anything within the downtown 5, 6, and 7 core area, anything there would have to be, any development would be reviewed by the Historic Preservation Board. So that was one of the other options that we wanted to just throw out there.
Jocelyn, if the HP board took it, they have one set of standards to apply to historically designated buildings and a different one for non-designated buildings, correct? Because the thought is now that's done by Planning Commission?
Well, there's a couple things. So right now, Historic Preservation Board, they have to review anything that is either already designated historic through their certificate of historic appropriateness. So they have to review anything in that capacity. Is that what you're asking? So then if someone wants to come in and ask for a plan development overlay, that's not currently reviewed by the Historic Preservation Board if the property is not designated historic. That would go to the Planning Commission. So in this proposal, it would be taking, oops, good grief. Good thing I only have 3 slides. Anything in 5, 6, and 7, any type of application, have that go to the Historic Preservation Board.
Just those 3.
Yeah. There's maybe some pro to that in that then a board is looking at that. But the major con to that would be that it still isn't getting to the core of the issue where we really want to make some changes to the guidelines themselves and create those turn the guidelines into standards. So it wouldn't do that. But that could be, done at a later time. So
Jocelyn, I like the idea, everything that you said, up until you started to talk about the historical piece, because I think that's just a whole other discussion, and I think it'll bog you down from getting the other things done, and I think there's a lot of points of view on that, and we still want to support the historical preservation, but I just think it's one of those issues that's going to require a lot of discussion, I believe.
And you're right, it probably does. I think one of the theories there is the Planning Commission generally looks at bigger area issues, and historic preservation by ordinance has architects on the board who are trained to interpret this kind of stuff, and it would ultimately result in greater consistency of compatibility in the downtown area, just in that one area. So those are kind of but that, good options.
I prefer the alternative one.
Meaning the second one does.
This one.
Yes.
This one.
Yes.
I really like that, and it's still going to go to an approval basis.
Oh, absolutely.
So,
yes. Oh, absolutely. And
but
this would include community meetings, all of that.
I really like this one, and I don't want to ignore the historical piece, but I'd like to get this one done, and then have that discussion.
Yeah, and to that point, there would be another phase to this, if you will, because not to make things more complicated, we have this document and then we have this document. And so it's really confusing for applicants which one, what they're supposed to do. So this would be, hey, let's take a first stab at it, clean it up to the best that we can, turn guidelines into standards, and we think that'll get us at a playing field that we're getting the design we want. But we know the next phase, we really need to look through this document, which is a supplement, and this is applies to anything that's designated historic downtown, and merge them into one so that we have more consistency and more, it's all in one place, as well as you know, Littleton listens in the conversation we've been having about downtown and parking. There's been a lot of topics that have been coming out of that, so there may be some direction from the community based on that about design, and so that could be incorporated into whatever we want, you know, what the next phase would look like.
So just to really get in the weeds, we've talked about the parking issues, and one of the solutions has been to no longer grant a variance to something designated historical. And that's, there's a lot of discussion. Would that be part of that discussion then? Would that be the point at which council would look at that issue?
Not here, but the next piece of this, so it really is
It's
about...
the next piece, okay.
It is the next piece, and really that one gets also into the zoning code, right? So we'll be able to address the design through these two documents, but the code is also part of the conversation, to your point, that we need to have and look at. Because just to, not to get into the weeds more, but you know, you can get a variance or a waiver from parking if you're in the historic district. You can also request a waiver of parking if you apply for the PDO. So, you know, there's a few mechanisms that we really, in the zoning code, we need to look at as well as we move forward.
So, Jocelyn, so in this proposed scope, I like getting to a clean, consistent document that would have the standards that work. The Part B, which is the sub-project to integrate it with the historical design guidelines, how does that get scheduled in so we're not just leaving it out there at this point in time?
Good question. So it would be, this is the first phase, if you will. So once we bring forward and go through the approval process to update this proposed scope, if you will, and so that's done, then we would look at what is the next piece and what are the items that would be part of that.
But a rough idea, if we get through this in 4 months, given all of the approval components that are part of that, is it still a 2018 project to bring the historical Cs? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, I was just trying to get it, making sure we didn't.
So, are you saying the separate historic preservation stuff is going to get folded in?
No. We would just, then the second phase would be to review this document, see if there's any tweaks we want to make to that,
Okay,
make it consistent with this, and maybe it's another chapter, just however, I don't know.
Because this covers more than just downtown. There
Correct,
was some
yes. Yeah. So no, it wouldn't be to dilute anything in here. That would not be the idea.
And there are different documents. The small one is for specifically for designated buildings.
Yeah.
This one is for non-designated buildings. Question on organization. I wonder, is someone coming in who's going to renovate their building, if they're in this area, you just hand them this right now. So you're proposing something that they would have to go to a main chapter and then another chapter. Is that, and you're the ones who work with this a lot, Justin, so I kind of defer to your experience with that, but it just is that easier for building owners as well to reorganize it?
I think it will be. We spend a lot of time talking to folks about this document and how to navigate it.
Okay.
I agree. Once the professionals know how to work through this thing, then at least they know which section they're going to. But oftentimes, people that, we're trying to help figure out what they're wanting to do, we have to spend a lot of time just showing them how to use it. Okay. So I do believe simple and smaller will make it more user-friendly. Yeah.
So one just process that you would like to have a consensus from the council tonight before you direct your staff to go off for the next 3 months and not happen. So I know I supported it.
That's why she went last. She knows we're tired.
Doing it.
Working
I want to make sure that you have the agreement.
Sure.
I support this one.
Yeah, I support it, but I would also include not just our own citizens, but developers in giving us feedback on it.
Absolutely.
In what we're looking
Yes.
at, so that that engagement includes that part of the public that we actually want to at least be knowledgeable, and their comments would be valuable.
So I counted 4 right up to me, and then Phil 5, 7. So you've got consensus of council with that.
I assume we can throw this away?
Sorry?
Recycle. Throw it away. Okay.
Is that 7?
We're almost done. Jocelyn, do you have anything else? Any other
No.
questions of Jocelyn?
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jocelyn.
That takes us through our agenda items, and our deputy city manager has one more item.
Mark, just want to make sure I gave you an update, as he said in his last email on Friday, in regards to the fire service, that they had thrown on, the fire district had thrown on their agenda, looking at possibly a letter to us. That was based on there was some confusion around the date that they need to submit a letter to us if they want to withdraw from our agreements. That has been clarified. They have till the end of the year to submit that, so they did not take any action last night at their meeting in regards to that. So I just wanted to relay that all to you, since Mark's update on Friday was they were going to consider possibly.
So it's not at 1st of November, it's actually the end of the year.
Exactly.
The issue, there's, in talking with them, there's a provision in the contract where you can interpret it the other way. Because this doesn't make it, this from a contract standpoint, the city would not incur or have any additional or any lesser damages. From a legal standpoint, it doesn't change the city's liability at all, other than, and I think that they actually would have, they would be able to make a case that one provision pertains to the mediation, the other pertains to just a separate notice provision. And so my position in talking with both lawyers said, are you going to insist on doing this? Otherwise, we would like to have some time to work through this. And from a legal standpoint, the city's interests are not impacted in any way by this.
Okay, with that, we are adjourned.
Thanks.